Good evening and welcome to Hoopsville, the show that's been dedicated to Division III basketball since 2000 in our 21st season talking D3 hoops. I'm Dave McHugh. If you want to interact with the show or myself, be sure to check us out on social media. We're at D3 Hoopsville on most social media outlets like X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. We're also on the you can also use the hashtag Hoopsville. You can find us on Facebook as well, facebook.com/Hoopsville, where we're simulcasting the show, and on YouTube at youtube.com/D3Hoopsville, where we're also simulcasting tonight. Tonight, Hoopsville is the exclusive home for the top 16 seeds reveals. This event debuted 2 seasons ago and was created by the Division III men's and women's national committees. The idea to give everyone a preview of the committee's work when it comes to bracketing the NCAA tournament, while also giving the committees a practice run at that work. It also drives more excitement for this time of the season and showcase how great Division III basketball is. A reminder, these seeds are based on the Week 2 regional rankings, which comes from the data through this past Sunday's games. None of the results since Sunday have been factored in. Also keep in mind that these rankings tonight have no bearings on future selections, hosting, or bracketing decisions. This is simply a look at what teams have the top resumes in men's and women's basketball if the tournaments were to begin this week. If it gives us something more to talk about and ponder in the final 10 days of the regular season. Remember that brackets will be revealed on February 26th. A quick reminder on the criteria that regional advisory committees use, as well as the 10-member national committees use not only to select at-large teams, but also, of course, to identify potential hosts for the first 2 weekends of the NCAA tournaments. The primary criteria basically looks at how a team has done against Division III opponents, and there is no priority to this criteria. There is win-loss percentage, head-to-head results, results against common Division III opponents, results versus regionally ranked opponents, and the strength of schedule. There is secondary criteria, if needed. If the committee can't make a decision based on the primary criteria, they can then look at the entire win-loss percentage, taking into account non-Division III results, results versus common non-Division III opponents, and a Division III non-conference strength of schedule. And while it is popular for all of us to talk about, a reminder that things like an RPI, conference standings, public polls like the D3Hoops.com and WBCA polls, and the eye test are not things the committees are allowed to consider when making these decisions. All right, we got all that out of the way. Let's learn a little bit more about the entire process from both our national committee chairs who join us on the Hoopsville hotline. The chair of the women's committee is Bethany Danley, who's the associate director of athletics at Washington and Lee University. And the chair of the men's committee, Luke Flakurtzy, head coach of the University of Rochester men's basketball team. Bethany and Luke, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Dave.
Admittedly, I know this process is a beast for all of you, so I appreciate you finding some other time, especially Luke, with your busy travel schedule, to chat with us here on the Top 16s. We should point out, you guys have had a wealth of experience being on the committees. If I have it right, both of you are in your 4th year. Is that correct?
I'm actually in my 3rd year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you got a little bit more, Bethany, to put in the pot.
That's exactly right.
But still, obviously, a lot of time going through this, and you've been there since since this top 16 thing all started. Luke, question for you: how did the process go this year, especially in comparison to last year and the first year it was done in 2022?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think the addition of the top 16 to kind of our final stretch of the D3 basketball season has been really exciting. It gives us an opportunity to identify some of the top teams in the country at this stage. And just generate a buzz going into the selections and national tournament, which are just 10 days away. So the process, I think, has largely remained the same over the 3 years we've done it. But certainly, I think the value of it from our committee standpoint seems to be greater and greater each year. And it was just a really worthwhile exercise for our group, and just excited to share the information.
Bethany, same question from your side on the women.
Sure. I think Luke summarized it really well. As a whole, it's a really valuable experience for our group. When you're looking at ranking teams within regions, there are differences as opposed to when you're looking at the national level, just in terms of what some of those comparisons look like. You have some more data of common opponents and head-to-head comparisons within region oftentimes than you do at the national level. And so for us to talk through that as a group and assess the data, assess the different teams is really valuable heading into selections in 10 days is what I believe you said. So we really enjoyed it. We found it very purposeful.
I'm curious. Yeah, it's about 10 days out here on when you'll do the actual process. I'm assuming this helps maybe even save time, Bethany, but it also helps some of the newer committee members understand the process before they're thrown into the mix in a week and a half's time.
Yeah, I think that's all true. I think that having the new folks brought into the fold to look at teams on a national scale is really important. Again, we've got folks who are really knowledgeable and valuable and provide good input, and learning how some of those conversations take place is important, so that it's not the first time they're doing it when we're talking actual selections for the tournament. So yes, it was really worthwhile.
Luke, similar question. On the same token, you also start to understand maybe if you're going to have to make some adjustments with committee members being on or off these conversations, right?
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, that's not too big of a concern. Really, I think understanding how the exercise works is important for the viewers. We will start with after the automatic qualifiers are removed, we'll start with the top remaining ranked team in each of the 10 regions, and that's kind of how selections work. There'll be the top remaining team on the board, quote unquote, as we compare them across regions nationally and determine who has the best resume for selections. And so that's not something we do when we're producing our regional rankings week in and week out. So I think that's where the biggest value is for our national committee is going through that exercise, honestly learning how the system works, the actual database that we use to compare teams and to vote. And so it just going through this process now for the top 16 really takes some pressure off that learning experience when it comes to selections in 10 days.
You hinted at kind of a follow-up on that. Yeah, you treat these top 16 announcements or these slots, we should say, very similar to at-large bids, right? You get one team at the table at a time. You're not going to consider necessarily a number 2 in a region before a number 1. You're doing this the same way you would select at-larges.
Yes, it's virtually a practice selection process, just trying to identify the top teams in the country. And the way it works on the national level is if you're ranked behind someone in your region, you're not on the board until that team in front of you comes off. And so it could be an automatic qualifier. It could be a team that's selected for a Pool C. But yeah, we can't supersede our regional rankings. And so, if number 2 is on the board, number 3 can't get in before number 2. And so that's, again, part of the process that we're going through that's helpful for the committee.
Yeah, we should keep that in mind when we go to these reveals here of that. That's a pretty important part of it. Bethany, how are you guys balancing the primary criteria, even using secondary criteria for either this process or your general process? How's that been going along?
Sure, it's been going great. And I think that it's really similar to the conversation that we had the last time we were together, is you're looking at the full body of work. And Luke's analogy to the scale is really applicable. I was thinking about that quite a bit, actually, as I was just formulating thoughts for our conversation here. And that's something that is critical when we're having our discussions and comparing teams. We really tried to rely on primary criteria as much as we possibly could. I think we had 1 or 2 teams who we were looking at where we referenced the secondary criteria. But in general, at this point, you have quite a bit of primary criteria, and we really tried to rely on that heavily because it is the primary criteria. So the tricky part comes into play of how much weight are you putting into these different primary criteria. Again, going back to discussions that Lucas had previously, where I think he explains that very well. And that was what a lot of our discussions resulted in, because you're going to end up having teams with really high winning percentages with lower strength of schedules compared to teams that have really, really high strength of schedules where they have a good winning percentage. It's solid, but maybe they have a lot of regionally ranked wins. What does it look like when you're talking about opportunities to have those regionally ranked wins, opportunities for increasing your strength of schedule, given some of the constraints around conference scheduling and those requirements of conference competition? So all of those things came into play as we were discussing primary criteria, and we really relied heavily on the primary criteria and only utilized the secondary criteria a little bit.
I appreciate that insight. Luke, we mentioned already at the start of this show that, again, this is the data through Sunday's games. Any results this week are not relevant to these top 16s. They will be relevant, obviously, down the road. So it gets a little confusing. However, one question that I know came up last year, and admittedly, I don't remember the answer, so I'm asking you again. Do you guys reset the results versus regionally ranked opponents when doing this top 16? i.e., you have that data from last week, and the team, let's say, is 2-2 against regionally ranked opponents. Are you resetting it when you did this top 16, and now that team, say, is 2-4?
Yeah, so the data is a little bit outdated already as of this Thursday. As we've mentioned, there's been results to teams that are in our top 16 that weren't factored in. Everything that was considered is from the information through this past Sunday's games. I would say the only caveat to that is that the ranked order that we got to on Tuesday certainly was considered, but the regional ranked results that are in the data sheet as of Sunday are the results for the teams that were considered. But the rank order, like we referenced from Tuesday, it is considered. So the number one team in a region would have to come off the board first based on Tuesday's rankings versus the number two. And I think another addition to that is we had an opportunity to maybe dive in more to the quality of regionally ranked results, understanding that where a team was ranked in a region and the strength of those regions was for the first time really considered at a larger level.
Let me just clarify, because I don't think I said it exactly properly for those listening at home. So the VRRO data is based on week 1, if they were ranked and they were 2-2. You didn't reset that to say, okay, now what are they against week 2's rankings?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I realized in the middle of that I may not have asked it just right. Both of you have different roles in your regular jobs. Luke, you're a basketball coach, and Bethany, you're an administrator. I'm kind of curious how that role comes into play here. Bethany, start with you on the administrative side of it. How does that impact what you're doing either behind the scenes or with all this work?
Well, as an administrator, I just have a lot of meetings all the time. So it's a matter of fitting all of our committee meetings into my regular meetings. That's probably the biggest thing. Planning in advance, I live and die with my schedule. But other than that, it's just time management, like everybody does when you work in athletics, of figuring out, the balance of all of your different obligations and getting things done.
Luke, how does the coaching role play an impact on this process?
Obviously, my team's my number one priority still, and that's our focus here. It's a special time of year for our basketball team. So I'm just trying to find time in other areas of my life to commit to the committee work and finding a way to get it all done. But I'm really fortunate. Chris Manning, Ryan Rowland, my two assistant coaches, do a phenomenal job, and I can really rely on them for a lot of important aspects of what our program's doing right now, and that's nothing I take for granted.
Certainly a refrain we've heard from most chairs who are also basketball coaches. Quickly, before we get to the top 16s, because I know everybody wants to get to that, just things that everyone should keep in mind when they see these top 16s, or just the regional rankings in general this week. Luke, we'll start with you.
Data changes by the minute. And so again, this is through Sunday's data. We've already had some changes. If we did the exercise today, or if we, considered new regional ranked results, the data would change. And so this does not mean that these teams are guaranteed to get into the tournament. It does not mean they're guaranteed to host. This is just a snapshot in time. And when we do our regional rankings, when we do our selections, we're considering the data at that moment. And so that's just, I think, important to keep in mind. Although these are teams to be celebrated right now, we're really excited for the resume they put together so far. We are 10 days away from selections. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Bethany, any follow-up to that?
Luke said it really well. This very much is an exercise. This is not anything definitive. And we had some conversations internally within our committee, and this is a little bit what we talked about earlier. If we had new regional rankings, would some of our top 16 shift? I don't know. We're not there right now, right? We're using the data from Sunday, as Luke said. And so that's irrelevant in the scope of our conversation today, whether things would look different if rankings were different. It's possible that it could, because the point that's been well made is that things are evolving, teams are winning and losing, you're having shifts in what those ranked wins and losses are. Data does change. So I think if folks keep that in mind as they look and keep in perspective what the data is that we use for this exercise, that piece is important.
Well, I appreciate it, both of you. We'll look forward to hearing your thoughts after we revealed each of the full 16 from the men's and women's side of this. And at the end, we'll get some more thoughts from both of you, but I appreciate your time so far, and we'll look forward to getting back at you. Once again, but thanks to both committee chairs. Again, we will hear from them individually. A reminder before we begin, a couple of notes on our process tonight. We will reveal the seeds starting at the number 1, beginning with the men, following the first weekend hosting priority order. Also, we will reveal the first half of the seeds before switching to the women's rankings, and then we will swap from there. And with that in mind, let's get underway. We start with the men's top seed. At number 1, the Hampden-Sydney Tigers. HSC has been one of the top teams all season long at 21-2 through Sunday's schedule, with the program's 17th 20-win season and second consecutive, the first time that's happened since 2004. The Tigers are the top team in Region 6 and have 3 players averaging double figures in scoring, with Davidson Hubbard leading the way with just over 15 points a game and over 7 rebounds a contest. Adam Brazil's 12 points a game plus nearly 4 assists, along with Ryan Clement's 11 points and nearly 4 assists a game, round out the trio. Caleb Kimbrough's squad has only lost twice this season to conference foes Randolph-Macon and Guilford. At number 2, the Tigers' fiercest rival, the Randolph-Macon Yellow Jackets. Macon has been at the top of Division III for several seasons under the the 2002 Division III national champions, and home court advantage has been pivotal, having only lost twice at Crenshaw Gym since the start of the 2018-19 season. Josh Merkel's team is the second team in Region 6, being led by double-edged swords of Jabril Robinson and Keyshawn Pulley Jr., both averaging 13.5 to 14 points a game, and combined with Daniel Mbankwe with the three have responsible for more than 65% of the team's assists. Since losing 2 games in the first 3 games of the season, the Yellow Jackets have been unstoppable since losing to Hampden-Sydney on December 8th, winning 16 straight, including a win at Hampden-Sydney, and now lead the Old Dominion Athletic Conference by half a game. At number 3, here come the pride of Widener. Widener is looking to make the NCAA tournament for the second straight year, having won the MAC Commonwealth Championship last year before falling to Tufts in the NCAA opening round. Widener is the top team in Region 5 and is a perfect 12-0 at home this season, being led by Dominic Dunn with just over 14 points a game and just under 8 rebounds. Anthony DeCaro and Mike Mazur have 48 and 38% shooters from beyond the arc. Add in Kevin Schenk's 54% overall shooting, and Widener is a dangerous inside-outside threat. Widener is scoring nearly 85% a game while only giving up less than 70 points. Chris Caridios' team has challenged themselves in the out-of-conference schedule, helping boost them in this top 16s. At number 4, it's the John Carroll Blue Streak. Pete Moran's squad has stormed in the national spotlight the last 2 seasons thanks to transfers who have gelled on the court. John Carroll is currently the top-ranked team in the national poll, though that ranking does not play a role in this process, and are the top team in Region 7. JCU's 22-1 campaign through Sunday was the best record for a JCU men's team through 23 games in the 100-plus year history of the program. They have already clinched a 14th OAC regular season championship and hoping to make their 17th NCAA tournament appearance. Unfortunately, the Blue Streak's goal of going undefeated in Ohio Athletic Conference play for the first time since 1958 ended last night on the road at Otterbein. Previously, JCU's only loss had been a tough home defeat to Hampden-Sydney. Jake Giacone and Luke Frazier lead the team at nearly 19 points a game, with plenty of others adding scoring threats. At number 5, we only have to travel 5 miles to the west of John Carroll to get to Case Western Reserve. The Spartans are currently the second-ranked team in Region 5. CWRU dominated the first half of the regular season, going undefeated in non-conference play, culminating with 2 strong games at the D3Hoops.com Classic in Las Vegas. The Spartans are coming off their first-ever UAA championship last season, and they keep rewriting the record books with 20 and 22-win seasons the last 2 years. And this season, their 18 wins is tied for third most in a season. Anthony Mazio is where things start for Todd McGinnis' squad. The graduate transfer is averaging 19 points and 4.5 assists per game, which helps Colin Call be a threat both inside and outside with 15 points and 7.5 rebounds. Sam Trunley, coming off the bench, scoring 12.5 points a game, and Case has plenty of other options offensively. Case Western Reserve hopes to get to their third straight NCAA tournament, having never been to the postseason prior to 2022. Moving on to number 6, and we stay in the UAA to find New York University. The Violets have exploded onto the national scene under second-year head coach Dave Klatsky. NYU, which is the top team in Region 4, picked up a win over Case Western Reserve at home this weekend, avenging an earlier season loss to the Spartans. Despite a loss on Sunday, NYU remains on top of the UAA standings with 3 games to play. NYU is also enjoying the fruits of graduate transfers, and Spencer Friedman has been a one-man wrecking machine on a lot of opponent defenses. Friedman averages 17.5 points a game while also handing out an eye-popping 6+ assists per contest. Friedman also shoots better than 48% and has options in Zay Freeney's 15 points a game and Michael Savarino's 13+ points. NYU has also been enjoying finally some home cooking as the Violets have settled into John A. Paulson Center after a number of years having no permanent home court due to construction. On to number 7, and we head to the opposite side of New York State in the Oswego State Lakers. Jason Leon's squad has been pretty special to watch the last few seasons, ending Randolph-Macon's 64 home game winning streak in the NCAA round of 16 last season. The Lakers have lost only once this season to Case Western Reserve at the D3Hoops.com Classic, but since then Oswego has been unstoppable in their last 15 games. The Lakers are the top team in Region 3 thanks to players like Jemiah Sparks, who leads the team with 20 points a game, along with Aki Anderson, who's averaging 19 points a contest in the last 10 games while shooting an incredible 56% from three-point land. Oswego has also dominated the usually competitive SUNYAC, winning 54 of the last 56 conference games. The Lakers have one goal, and that's to get to Fort Wayne. And on to number 8 in the men's top 16 seeds, we head to San Antonio, Texas to find Trinity University. Jimmy Smith Tigers are the top team in Region 10, having only lost once this season and showed just how good they were during the holiday break in Las Vegas. Trinity has clinched the SCAC regular season title and top seed in the tournament and have won 20 or more games 3 seasons in a row. The squad has 3 players averaging more than 14 points a game with Christian Green, Jacob Harvey, and Tanner Brown. The team is also willing to share the ball. 4 individuals average 2 or more assists per game, while the team is shooting 45% from the floor. Tigers finished the season on the road first facing St. Thomas, the lone team to upend Trinity this season. The Tigers are hoping to clinch their 11th NCAA tournament appearance, but first since 2014. And that rounds out the top 8 on the men's side, as you can see them again there on your screen, starting with Hampden Sydney. We're now going to switch it over to the women's side of things, and like the men, we'll start with the top spot and announce right now the first 8. And on the women's side, at number 1, the top seed in this process, the New York University Violets. Meg Barber's squad has come out strong this season and are the top team in Region 4, having fallen in the NCAA tournament the last 2 seasons, each time to the round of 8 to the eventual national champion. The team is a consensus top team in both national polls. But remember, that doesn't play a role in this process. The team has won 22 straight games, which is a new school record, and is on the verge of winning their 3rd straight UAA title. The squad is led by first-team All-American Natalie Bruns, who's increased her program blocked shots record and is the 18th Violet to reach 1,000 points. She's averaging 15 points a game and more than 7 rebounds a contest. But then add in last season's National Player of the Year, Morgan Morrison, who transferred to NYU and in contributing 13 points a game and nearly 8 rebounds a contest. And NYU's offense is just going everywhere they want to go, including Megan Bauman, who runs the show with more than 4.5 assists. And the Violets have plenty of outside shooters to worry any defense. NYU has been dominating opponents, winning games by more than 28 points on average. On to the second-ranked team in the women's top 16. It's the Rhode Island College Anchor Women. RIC has helped change the landscape of women's basketball in New England. Jenna Cosgrove's team is in the midst of a 23-game winning streak, the longest in program history, and are enjoying a 21-game home winning streak as well. Rhode Island is the top team in Region 2 and has already clinched the Little East Conference regular season title, making it a 5th straight season they have outright won or shared that title. RIC has already beaten 5 teams nationally ranked this season, helping likely flip the road most teams will have to traverse through the NCAA tournament on the East Coast. The team is also dominating opponents by nearly 28 points a game with 3 players in double figures in Sofia Guerrero, Isabella Booth, and Angelina Nardolillo. And all of this coming off the program's best season ever last campaign, reaching the Final Four with a 28-4 record. On to number 3. The 3rd seed is the Wisconsin Whitewater Warhawks. UW Whitewater started the season with a program best 17-0 mark and has the best strength of schedule in Division III. Coach Kerry Carollo's squad is the top team in Region 8, and the winningest coach in WIAC history has players like senior forward Alea Grundahl to help lead the charge. Grundahl is a 4-time All-American and program's all-time leading scorer. She's scoring more than 20 points a game, ranking in the top 15 in Division III. Junior guard and Coach Carollo's daughter, Casey Carollo, is also an All-American, scoring about 14 points a game, pulling down more than 7 rebounds a contest, while also handing out more than 4 assists per game. Carollo actually scored her 1,000th point and pulled down her 500th rebound in the same game this season. UWW has made the tournament 7 times in their last 14 years. At number 4, it's the Polar Bears of Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. Second-year head coach Megan Phelps has brought Bowdoin back to the national spotlight, recording a 20-win season for the first time since 2020 and the 19th time in program history. Bowdoin, which is on top of Region 1, has been so good this season they actually handed the Amherst Mammoths their worst defeat in 18 years, winning 67-33 just last week. That win also clinched the NESCAC top seed in the upcoming conference tournament. The last time Bowdoin won a NESCAC title was 2020, when the Polar Bears were set to host the sectional weekend at Morrell Gymnasium when things were shut down. 2 players, senior Megan Tan and Jess Giorgio, were the lone players left from that campaign. Sydney Jones is the one stealing the spotlight this season. She is the best in the conference in scoring, rebounds, assists, and steals, and it's helped Bowdoin turn quite a few heads. Now on to number 5, and it's the Transylvania Pioneers, who found themselves in this exact same spot a year ago on this show, and it translated into the program's first ever national title, beating Christopher Newport in a showdown of undefeated teams at American Airlines Arena in Dallas, Texas. Transylvania hasn't had a championship letdown this season. The Bat-themed Pioneers are the best in Region 8 and boast a 56 straight game winning streak, which is the 7th longest in Division III women's basketball history, 11th longest in NCAA women's hoops history, and 15th longest in college basketball history. Coach Julie Folks has a team that can see up to 15 players score in a game, though it all starts with Deja Thornton and her 15 points and nearly 9 boards a game. Transylvania was able to initially use the home court at the Beck Center to their advantage last season before winning 2 games on neutral courts. The last time Transylvania lost at home, it was the 2022 NCAA tournament against Trine in the Elite 8. That's also the only loss at home since the 2020 season. On to number 6. It's the Christopher Newport Captains, who were last season's national runner-ups. The Captains continue to frustrate teams with their 94 feet of defensive chaos, winning 96 times in the last 99 games. The top team in Region 6 continues to be a force despite losing All-Americans Anya Simmons and Sandra Fawn to graduation. Also considering due to injuries, CNU has only started their projected starting lineup 3 times this season. The Captains have only had about 10 minutes of time in a game where they've trailed this season, and they are tough to beat no matter where the game is played. Christopher Newport owns a Division III best 50-game home winning streak and a Division III 40-game road winning streak. Bill Broderick's program is one of only 2 in Division III to reach the sectional round of the NCAA tournament each of the last 7 tournaments. Speaking of 7, it's on to number 7. And it's the Catholic University of America Cardinals. The CUA is the top-ranked team in Region 5 for just the 2nd time in program history. The team is 22-1 with wins over 6 of the 7 ranked teams they have played, including a win over and a loss to the Scranton Royals. Catholic has also become the 6th team and 3rd program in Landmark Conference play to win 20 straight games, joining Scranton and Moravian with that feat since the Landmark was formed in 2007. The Cardinals are using some youth to their advantage. Sophomore Anna Skoblik is the top 10 in the landmark in points, rebounds, assists, and blocks per game, while also shooting 53% from the floor. Catholic has nearly locked up the Landmark Conference regular season title, and Matthew Donahue's squad has seen their hard work rewarded with their highest national ranking in program history. On to number 8, and it's the Bates College Bobcats. We return to Maine, the Nescacken Region 1. That's our second selection from a region in this top 16 on the women's side. Bates has been battling with Bowdoin for conference control, splitting the regular season with their conference rivals, though one of those games counted for the conference. The Bobcats have won 20 games for the sixth time in program history, the first time since 2005. Senior captain Morgan Kennedy leads the team at 13.5 points a game, but it's sophomore center Elsa Doliero who has been the breakout star. She's averaging more than 13 points and more than 7 rebounds a game, while also averaging 2 blocks a contest. She's the daughter of Bates Associate Director of Athletics Adrian Scheibels, who was a very successful former Bowdoin head coach. Junior Alexander Long is also a key piece to the puzzle. Long is handing out nearly 4 assists per game while also joining the block party, which has shattered the NESCAC record books. Bates has 141 blocked shots so far in 24 games. That's nearly 6 rejections a contest. Bates is looking to the postseason and preparing for the first NESCAC tournament game to be in Lewiston since 2009. And that does it for the women's first 8. You can see a recap of those first 8 right there on your screen. A terrific group of teams. Only one repeat regional squad, and of course the defending national champions in Transylvania. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we will switch things up, go back to the men's side of things, and reveal seeds 9 through 16. You are watching the exclusive coverage of the Division III men's and women's top 16 seeds here on Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com and our friends at Sport Tours International from the NABC studios. Back with more shortly.
Coach of the Year, Administrator of the Year, All-America Team, Wade Trophy. The WBCA doesn't just honor coaches, but players, administrators, and much more. The WBCA strives to honor those who have contributed to the advancement of women's basketball. Celebrate the present, honor the past, look to the future.
It's on us to stop sexual assault.
In any way that we can.
To get a friend home safe.
To never blame the victim.
It's on us.
To stand up.
To make our community safe for all.
It's on us.
It's on us to look out for each other at parties.
It's on us.
To be more than just a bystander.
To step up and say something.
It's on us, all of us.
To stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
The National Association of Basketball Coaches is the nation's premier professional development and advocacy organization for basketball coaches at every level. The NABC strives to serve as the voice for coaches on national issues while advancing the core value of leadership, service, advocacy, education, and inclusion. To learn more about the NABC and to become a member, visit NABC.com and follow the NABC on social media at NABC1927. That's NABC.com or NABC1927 on social media. We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's nearly 850 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over 2 decades. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're D3Hoops.com at www.D3Hoops.com. Welcome back. We're in the middle of the reveals for Division III. Men's and women's basketball, the top 16 reveals, that is. Hoopsville is the exclusive home for this year's announcements. I'm Dave McHugh. We've already revealed the top 8 for both men and women. It's now time to see the numbers 9 through 16. Remember, this is based on the Week 2 regional rankings data and the results through Sunday's games. Results since Sunday are not factored into these decisions. Also a reminder, this is simply a look at how things might line up if the NCAA tournament started this week. A lot can change in the next 10 days. Also a quick reminder, we will hear from each committee member at the conclusion of the 16 announced men's and women's teams. We will go back to the men's side to kick things off once again. And we start at number 9. It's the Trine Thunder, who are the third best team in Region 7 through Week 2's rankings. Trine is knocking on the doorstep of breaking the program's Division III era mark for wins in a season, which stands at 22. Brooks Miller's squad has already clinched a share of a third MIAA conference regular season title and hoping to secure the top seed in the upcoming conference tournament. Cortez Garland leads the team in scoring at more than 15 points a game and is one of 4 Thunder players in double figures. Defensively, Emmanuel Magnanglo has already broken the program record for blocks in a career. He has 210, breaking a record that dates back to 2000, and doing it in 36 less games. Trine already has big wins this season over UW-Platteville, Hope twice, and Calvin, with a second game against Calvin coming up on Saturday. Up next is number 10, and we have another familiar name in Trinity, this time the Trinity College Bantams. The Connecticut-based Trinity program is the top 10 in the Region 1 rankings. I should say the top team in the Region 1 rankings, winning 20 games to start the season, suffering their only loss to the Williams Eafs in a 1-point game on the road on a buzzer beater. Right now, the Bantams are outscoring their opponents by 23 points a game, which almost 5 points better than the program record. Ben Callahan Gold leads a trio of players in double figures by pouring in about 17 points a game. The team is shooting 45% from the floor and out-rebounding opponents by 10 per contest. Despite the dominating season, Trinity enters the NESCAC tournament as a 2 seed. And to earn their way back to the NCAA tournament, they would like to do so for the first time since 2016. At number 11, it's the Guilford Quakers, who are the third pick not only from Region 6, but also from the difficult Old Dominion Athletic Conference. Tom Palumbo's squad has won 20 or more games in back-to-back seasons for the first time since 2010. That program season went all the way to the national semifinals. The program is also in the top 3 in Division III in points allowed in just over 56 points a game. They're also the best free throw shooting team in the ODAC and in the top 25 of Division III. They also rank in the top 30 in opponents' field goal percentage. Graduate guard Tyler Dermott not only is the team's leading scorer at just under 20 points a game, but he broke the all-time steals mark for the program, currently sitting just under 200 for his career. But he also broke the record for the most steals in a game with 11 against Methodist this season. Julius Birch is also making significant contributions with nearly 10 rebounds a game, while also having the third best conference shooting percentage at nearly 58% a game. Guilford already has big wins this season, with the biggest being a victory over Hampton-Sydney. We now go to number 12, and we're going to have to head all the way to the West Coast and introduce you to the Cal Lutheran Lutes. Cal Lu is the second team selected from Region 10 and has comes out on top of the Southern California Intercollegiate Athletic Conference regular season. The Lutes have won 17 straight games, which is a program record. What makes Cal Lutheran's season so remarkable? Russell White's team has no one in the top 10 in the SCIAC in scoring, rebounds, assists, or steals, though the team has 3 players in double figures in scoring, with Devin Lewis leading the charge with just over 14 points a game. Tommy Griffiths is adding 11 points, and Brock Susko has 11 points as well a game. The team has come out of the SCIAC somewhat quietly, as everyone has been watching Claremont Mudd Scripps, Pomona Pitzer, Redlands, and others, and looking to produce the same magic the women's soccer program was able to create on their way to a first-ever NCAA national title back in December. On to number 13. Lucky 13 is the Keene State Owls, the top team in their Region 1. Region 2. Keene State is continuing their success under interim head coach David Hastings. The team has already clinched a second consecutive Little East Conference regular season title. First time ever doing that since joining the conference. And the team is prolific on offense. boasting 3 players in the last 2 seasons to score their 1,000th career point. It starts with Jeff Hunter, who got his 1,000th point last season. He was the national statistical champion in doubles last season and once again leads the category this season. Add in the offensive capabilities of Octavio Brito and Mason Jean-Baptiste, and Keene State has been hard to keep on the ground. Keene State is 49-5 in the last 2 seasons, have won 30 or more games 7 of the last 9 full seasons, and the Owls are looking to get to their 9th NCAA tournament, where they've been to the Elite 8 twice already. On to number 14, and it's another Owl mascot, this time the Profs of Rowan University. Rowan is the number 2 team in Region 3 rankings and are trying to wrap up a regular season NJAC title, though a loss last night has put a pause on that goal for now. Interim head coach Eric Brennan has continued Rowan's recent success. Jazier Noel ranks 8th in the nation with 15 double-doubles while averaging 21.5 points and 9.5 rebounds per game. Noel's accomplishments are even more incredible considering he scored his 1,000th point in his 2 seasons at Rowan. Khalif Mears leads the nation in steals per game at just over 3.5 and is the team's 2nd leading scorer at 19 points a game as a freshman. Rowan has other options on offense. The Profs are the 3rd highest scoring offense in Division III at a tick under 90 points per contest, and they make their free throws 2nd in the nation at 19.4 made free throws per game. On to number 15, the University of Wisconsin-Platteville Pioneers, the first team selected from Region 9. UW-Platteville clinched the WIAC regular season title last week thanks to a double-digit come-from-behind win over UW-Oshkosh. The Pioneers are 10-1 at home and hope to continue playing at home come March. Jeff Gard's team is one of the best three-point shooting squads in Division III at just over 38% from beyond the arc, while also turning it over rarely, just 9 times a game, 3rd best in the country. Senior Logan Pearson is 6th in the country, scoring 23 points a game, while senior Ben Probst at 13.1 points and sophomore Max Love at 12.3 points are also scoring in double figures. And we round out the 16 with the Catholic University of America Cardinals. Catholic is the 2nd-ranked team in Region 5, and prior to this weekend, Catholic had been on a tear, going through 14 straight opponents, its largest winning streak since the 2014-15 season. Aaron Kelly has a team with plenty of scoring options and depth. The Cardinals are led by Jesse Hafmeister, who has nearly 1,400 career points in his career, and on Wednesday, Tommy Kelly joined Hafmeister on the 1,000 career point list. Despite a few losses, Catholic is outscoring its opponents by 16 points a game, which is in the top 10 in Division III. And thanks to a win last night, have secured the top seed in the Landmark Conference Tournament. First time COA has been the top seed in the Landmark in both men's and women's tournaments since 2013. So there you go, your top 16 on the men's side through Week 2's regional rankings. Now we're once again joined by Luke Flakertzy on the Hoopsville hotline now that the men's rankings are out. Luke, we'll start with the one that I think that's the biggest topic in Division III men's basketball and has been for several years. There's more parity once again in men's basketball. It continues to become a deeper and deeper field. That certainly means far more losses as well. We seem to see that here in the rankings. How did it impact rankings from your perspective, especially this top 16?
Yeah, the resumes that we're comparing here at the top are very, very close. And so there's a lot of parity, but I want to start by just kind of celebrating their excellence. 88% winning percentage in this group, average SOS of 570, and at least, kind of in the average range of 5 wins versus regional ranked opponents. And so those are some exemplary resumes and certainly some great achievements to date. But yeah, as we get, kind of past number 10 on our list, the resumes get really, really close and distinguishing between them becomes harder and harder. And I think that's just a reflection of the parity that we see in men's basketball right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. The conversation normally is, hey, let's celebrate somebody who's gotten to this point undefeated or with 1 loss. Now, hey, you got to this point with only 3 or 4 losses. That's pretty a big accomplishment for a lot of these teams. What impacts do you see having an effect on this top 16, for example? Not only in the coming 10 days, but that we've already seen. I have a feeling this top 16 isn't going to hold necessarily in 10 days.
Yeah, I think we did it different today. It would certainly change not only the order, but maybe the teams that are in at the end. We've seen 2 or 3 results this week that have impacted it already. So it's a point that we've reiterated a lot. This is in flux constantly, and so teams really need to kind of focus on just the game in front of them and keep taking care of business and not worrying too much about their resume based on this top 16 result.
How do you think losses, maybe potential upsets, et cetera, is going to affect the bracketing side of this? Because this top 16 kind of helps along with that process.
Obviously, these are the teams that have the strongest resumes right now, so they do have kind of the driver's seat when it comes to possibly hosting, possibly bracketing. But it's with 10 days in front of us, it's way too much time to really put too much stock in that. Obviously, at the Division III level, there's a lot of layers that go into bracketing and decisions that go into hosting. And so, like we've said, this does not guarantee these 16 teams anything other than today on February 16th, they have really strong resumes.
And then I guess the follow-up with that is, great, you're in this top 16 that we've revealed now. You should probably prepare to maybe be a host at some point. But if you're outside the top 16, it doesn't mean you're out of this conversation, as we've talked about a little bit here.
No, we encourage as many people as possible to bid who are even in the mix. So our rack chairs, our national committee members will spend a lot of time in between now and end of day Friday just making sure that the top teams in their region have completed the bid process, not only for the first weekend, but the second weekend, and not to try to do any forecasting on their own, because there's a lot of layers that go into it. You might end up being the 4th seed in a pod, but for whatever reason, you get a chance to host. And so, it would be a shame if that bid wasn't in and complete. Same thing when it goes to the second weekend. And so we'll do our legwork to really follow up on it and make sure that bids are complete and we have as many options as possible as we bracket the tournament.
I appreciate your time, Luke. We'll get back to you with Bethany as well a little later in the program to get more of your reactions. Once again, thanks to Luke Flickertzy. There's another look at your 1 through 16 on the men's side, starting with Hamden, Sydney, and finishing up with Catholic. 9 of the 10 regions in Division III men's basketball represented in that top 16. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll look at numbers 9 through 16 on the women's side. You're watching an exclusive presentation of the Division III men's and women's top seeds reveals right here on Hoopsville. We look forward to coming back to this one, presented by D3Hoops.com, the Sports Tours International from the NABC studios.
We are the coaches of women's basketball. We are leaders and teachers, dreamers and winners. We are professionals who conduct ourselves ethically and with integrity. We place the education, safety, and well-being of the athletes we coach above all else and teach them the fundamental values they need to succeed in life. We are coaches united for the good of our game and those who play it. We are the WBCA.
For the love of the game, but for those of us who are Division III student athletes, it's more than that, a lot more.
Sure, the game is important. But as we work so hard to build both mind and body, it's more about team.
That is why NCAA Division III teamed up with Special Olympics. And in giving the gift of sport to those for whom it seemed an impossible dream, we are working to make this a better world.
Help us keep that dream alive.
You can make a difference.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's nearly 850 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over 2 decades. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're D3Hoops.com at www.d3hoops.com.
The National Association of Basketball Coaches is the nation's premier professional development and advocacy organization for basketball coaches at every level. The NABC strives to serve as the voice for coaches on national issues while advancing the core value of leadership, service, advocacy, education, and inclusion. To learn more about the NABC and to become a member, visit NABC.com and follow the NABC on social media at NABC 1927. That's NABC.com or NABC 1927 on social media. Welcome back. We're in the midst of the top 16 reveals for Division III men's and women's basketball. Hoopsville exclusive home of this year's announcement. I'm Dave McHugh. We've already revealed the top 16 for the men and the top 8 for the women. A reminder of what that looks like on the women's side. It's now time to see who are the women's 9 through 16 seeds. Remember, this is based on the Week 2 regional rankings and data and results through Sunday's games. Results since Sunday are not factored into this decision. Also a reminder, this is simply a look at how things might line up if the NCAA's tournament started this week. A lot can change. And with that in mind, let's get on to number 9. Ninth team is University of Wisconsin Oshkosh. The Titans are the second-ranked team in Region 9 behind their rivals at Whitewater and claimed at least a share of their 15th WIAC regular season title, fourth time under head coach Brad Fisher. The Titans allow a WIAC low 49.5 points per game while holding a league opponents to 35.8% shooting. Junior Bridget Folick is the conference leader in three-point shots made, while senior Osterman leads the league with three-point shooting at over 40% beyond the arc. Senior Casey Vale is the WIAC's best rebounder at 8 per contest. With a win Wednesday, UW Oshkosh has now won 20 or more games in the last 11 full seasons, dating back to Coach Fisher's first season as head coach. We now move on to number 10. It is the Smith College Pioneers. The all-women's college saw its basketball program come tantalizingly close to a national title game berth last season, after advancing to the program's first ever Final Four. Lynn Hersey's squad has become one of the nation's elite programs, having won 50 games in the last season alone. Senior guard Ali Yamada leads the way with nearly 15 points a game while shooting better than 41% from the arc. Senior Jessie Ruffner and fifth-year forward Sophia Rosa are the two best shooters not only in the NUMAC but in Division III. Ruffner shooting better than 58%, which is 10th in Division III and top in the NUMAC. Rosa is shooting just under 58%, which is 11th in Division III and second in the conference. Both are scoring in double figures per game as well. Smith has qualified for the postseason 12 times under head coach Lynn Hersey. On to number 11, and it's the Hope Flying Dutch, which is the top-ranked team in Region 7 in Week 2's rankings. Earlier this season, Coach Brian Morehouse became the fastest coach to 700 career victories by any coach in any division, men or women, and it's thanks to the consistency of the Hope program has become. Hope is seeking its 11th straight NCAA tournament appearance and 24th overall. They are one of just 3 Division III programs with at least 3 national titles, joining WashU and Amherst on that list. The team is currently on an 18-game winning streak, all with 5 new starters this season. Sophomore Sydney Viss leads the team in scoring at just over 12 points a game. Junior Olivia Bellows is coming off the bench to also score in double figures at just under 11 points per contest. Hope as a team ranks 3rd in three-point shooting and 7th in made three-pointers, and the team is 3rd in scoring margin at more than 22 points a game, holding opponents to 55.5 points per contest. On to number 12, it's the SUNY New Paltz Hawks, which are the top-ranked team in Region 3. The SUNYAC regular season champions are the top seed in the upcoming conference tournament for the 4th time in the last 5 years. They also clinched a 5th consecutive 20-plus win season. Brianna Fitzgerald has been a Conference Player of the Week 4 times and already eclipsed the 1,000-point plateau in just her 3rd season. She's already closing in on the program's all-time scoring mark. Fitzgerald also became the 2nd player in program history to post a triple-double in a game when she registered 16 points, 11 rebounds, and 10 assists in a win over Brockport, game that also saw teammate Jenny Walton drop a career-high 34 points, 2nd most in program history. On to number 13, and that lucky number is the Johns Hopkins University Blue Jays, the second-ranked team in Region 5. First-year head coach Rodney Rogan has made an immediate impact, opening the season 3-1 against NYU, WashU, Marymount, and Gettysburg. The Blue Jays have rattled off 17 straight wins from November 17th to January 27th. The offense is revamped under Rogan, but the defense still remains the best in the nation, allowing just over 50 points a game while scoring about 70 points per contest, the highest since 2005. The team is in the top 10 in Division III in rebounds per game, all of this while dealing with injuries to key players, like leading scorer Elizabeth Peebles, who has missed 8 games, and starting point guard Kendall Dunham, who's missed 10 games. The Blue Jays are undefeated at home this season and won 31 of its last 35 games at Goldfarb Gymnasium and could finish with a program record 19 wins in conference play with a win on Saturday. On to number 14 in the women's top 16 seeds. It's the DeSales College Bulldogs. The second-ranked team in Region 4 has become synonymous with NCAA tournament appearances. Fred Richter's program has now won 20 or more games in 8 of the last 10 full seasons. They're riding a 15-game winning streak, and the Bulldogs have already clinched the MAC Freedom regular season title. The Bulldogs are in the top 5 nationally defensively, allowing only 45.7 points per game and only allowing teams to shoot 32% from the floor. Senior Michaela Reese leads the team in scoring at more than 16 points a game while grabbing nearly 8 rebounds, handing out more than 3 assists, grabbing 2 steals, and blocking more than 3 shots a game. Oh, she also shoots 46% from the floor. The veteran team also has senior Megan Beeler adding 12.5 points, grabbing 6 boards, and notching 3 steals a contest. On to number 15, and it's the Illinois Wesleyan University Titans. The second-ranked team from Region 8 to get into the top 16, the first from the very competitive CCIW. The Titans have used the opening quarter of games to make a statement, but used the second quarter of games to put conference opponents away, essentially ending games by halftime. Maya Smith's squad has scored nearly 2,000 points so far this season, third most in Division III, while the average of nearly 83 points a game is 5th best in the country. IW's success, especially since midseason, is thanks in part to Kate Palmer. The junior has scored in double figures in all but 2 games since the new year, while also handing out more than 3 assists per contest, top 10 in the division. She then gets help defensively from Sawyer White, who has a program record 97 steals, top 5 in the division, and those turnovers are key. The Titans are 18-0 when winning the turnover battle. Illinois Wesleyan will win the CCIW regular season title with a win on Saturday. And on to number 16, our final spot on the women's top 16. And it's the pride of Springfield and the home of basketball is the third-ranked team from the Region 2 to be selected and the second from the NUMAC. Rachel Vinter returned for her graduate year and has not only been the point guard, but asked to score for the first time in her career. Vinton has poured in 12-plus points a game while handing out nearly 4 assists per game and grabbing more than 3 steals. Junior Angela Teremcha is averaging double-doubles with more than 13 points and 11 rebounds per game to add to Vinton's contributions. It's also helped Naomi Graves in her 33rd season as head coach lead the Pride to at least 18 wins for the 7th straight season. The Pride are close to at least a share of their 7th NUMAC regular season title. It would be their first since 2014-15. And there is a look at your women's top 16 in Division 3. As you can see, NYU on top at number 1, all the way down to Springfield. Of course, this is through the Week 2 rankings. We're now, once again, joined by Bethany Danley back here on the Hoopsville Hotline, now that we've seen the entire 16 teams on the women's side. Curious, Bethany, just your reactions. How did the process go and the teams you guys kind of ended up with?
Variation in resumes, and that makes things challenging when you're talking about these comparisons at the national level. There wasn't a lot for us to look at in terms of common opponents or head-to-head matchups, so you're really relying heavily on the resume with regards to winning percentage, strength of schedule, and then performance against ranked opponents. So we feel good about where we landed. I'm sure that there's many people out there who might want to debate some of the decisions, but that's because they're really difficult comparisons to make.
Women do not have priority first weekend. Men do in terms of hosting, and we saw a couple of the top 16s where the same school is mentioned. Obviously, things will change by the time the actual selections are made, but how has this already impacted the work you or your committee will be doing in terms of trying to determine who will host games in the first weekend?
Yeah, it's always a bit of a challenge when you do not have the priority with regards to hosting, because some of your top seeds may not be serving as hosts. So where are you putting them in a place where they still are being recognized as being some of the higher seeds in those different pods, while acknowledging that they are not going to actually be hosting those games? It's important that we have a lot of people put bids in, so we have options of where we can send different people, because there will be sites where the men will be hosting, and so those won't be options on our side.
And I realize this is a little further out. How will you then treat a team, or really how will you bracket first and then treat a team who should host? Will you bracket it as if they are the host and make adjustments from there, or will you bracket with the knowledge that they're not hosting at all and maybe adjust things accordingly?
Yeah, I actually don't have the answer to that. I have yet to participate in bracketing. I do some of the pre-work. It's my understanding that even though they are not hosting, that it would still be set up as if they are the top team in that bracket. I don't have a great definitive answer for you in that regard, though, but that would be my assumption.
No, that's fine. I realize some of this is evolving and changing minute by minute. And obviously a lot of decisions are going to come down to who's put in even to host in the first place. God forbid you put a quad together and you got to move that quad and nobody in that quad put any hosting in. So you're kind of in a tougher spot. Again, the process and what your committee went through, how did it go? You guys have anything to still iron out?
I think that the conversation just continues to evolve, where we want to try and have some consistency in how we're looking at teams. And again, sometimes as an outsider's view, I think it can be, people can think you're not consistent in how you're looking at things. But as long as we have our internal rationale and we are trying to look at teams in a similar way with that full body of work as best we can, those are the conversations we need to continue having, whether it's with regards to regional rankings or when we're comparing teams at the national level.
Well, I appreciate your time here and what we've had already. We're looking forward to coming back in just a few minutes to have you and Luke back on, kind of roll up our sleeves a little bit and dive into this a bit more. But I appreciate it so far, and thanks for your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you once again to Bethany Danley. Before we go and turn this show back to a more traditional Hoopsville-styled program, we do have a few things to go over and a couple of quick reminders. First and foremost, the men's selection and bracket show will take place on Monday, February 26th at 1 p.m. Will Haskett and myself will be with you to unveil the 64-team tournament on NCAA.com. First and second rounds of the tournament will take place on March 1st and 2nd, and the sectional weekends will take place on March 8th and 9th. Those games taking place at host institutions. The national semifinals this year will take place on Thursday, March 14th at 5:30 and 8 p.m. Eastern for those two games, and streamed on NCAA.com. The national title will be seen on CBS Sports Network at 4 p.m. on Saturday, March 16th. Those games taking place in Fort Wayne, Indiana. As far as the women's selection and bracket show, it'll also take place on February 26th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. Jeremiah Johnson and myself will bring you those on NCAA.com. The women's first two rounds will also take place on March 1st and 2nd, and the sectional weekends on March 8th and 9th, also at host institutions. The women's national semifinals will take place on Thursday, March 14th at 5 and 7:30 p.m., also streamed on NCAA.com. The national title game will be streamed live on CBS Sports Network's website on Saturday, March 16th, re-airing on the network at 10 a.m. Sunday morning. Those games taking place in Columbus, Ohio. So there you go, your top 16s on the men's and women's sides. If the tournaments were to start right now, according to our national committees in Division III. What does this all mean? What do we make of it? How do you break it down? We got a couple of things ahead on the show. First, we'll return to our committee chairs. We'll talk to Luke Flakertzy along with Bethany Danley to give their a little bit more in-depth intake on the decisions that they made and overall job that they're trying to accomplish, not only with these top 16s, but what is going to be a very busy 10 days ahead. Then we'll turn it to our pundits. We'll get our men's panel and our women's panels on here to get their quick reactions to these top 16s. It's all ahead on this Hoopsville exclusive show, the top 16s revealed. They've been revealed. Now we roll up our sleeves and dive into the information. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com and our friends at Sport Tours International. When we come back, we'll talk to the committee chairs, Luke and Bethany, one more time, and get more details from them.
Coach of the Year, Administrator of the Year, All-America Team, Wade Trophy. The WBCA doesn't just honor coaches, but players, administrators, and much more. The WBCA strives to honor those who have contributed to the advancement of women's basketball. Celebrate the present, honor the past, look to the future.
These are your teams, your players, your community of fans. This is where they play, where they practice, where you cheer. At every meet, every event, every game. Your community is passionate, dedicated, supportive. You know the tension of a close game and the thrill of the win. So while you're cheering, keep an eye out for anything out of the ordinary. If you see something suspicious, say something to local authorities.
We are calling you, all of you. We are calling all Division III schools to join our cause.
It's on us to start the change. It's on us to be the change. It's on us. It's on Division III. It's on all of us to stop sexual assault.
I used to never really talk, ever. I was afraid if I said something wrong, everyone would laugh at me. But then I started to play golf with Special Olympics. It helped me to find my voice. And now everyone else is speechless.
I learned a lot of valuable lessons playing college football. I never thought about the health benefits of exercise until I actually started to talk to coaches in college. It's not only just for performance, it's for life. My coaches instilled the importance of well-being, not only building up strength, mental health, getting enough sleep, eating properly is all what it is to be healthy. I decided that I want to go on a personal trainer and share my knowledge that I obtained in college about physical and mental well-being.
Welcome back to Hoopsville, everybody. As we continue to roll along, we have doffed the jacket, as we like to say, as we now will roll up the sleeves a little bit to dive into this top 16s that we've gotten after the Week 2 regional rankings, which came out on Tuesday. Reminder, you'll get one more regional ranking next week on Tuesday that's public before the selections are made for the NCAA tournaments and the brackets are made. We'll finally see the last regional rankings and data after the brackets have been announced on February 26th. What does it all mean? What work did the committee feel they did well, didn't, etc.? It's a in-depth conversation, to say the least, and I had a chance to go further into all of this with Luke Flakertzy and Bethany Danley a little bit earlier today. And once again, welcome back to Hoopsville and to the committee chairs. As we roll up our sleeves a little bit, we've gotten rid of the jacket, as I mentioned, as we get into the more Hoopsville-based conversation. A little more in-depth, a little bit more detail-based. Of course, Luke Flakertzy, head coach at Rochester, joining us, men's committee chair, and Bethany Danley, associate athletics director at WNL, on the women's committee as chair. So appreciate it, as always, you guys, and appreciate your time earlier. First and foremost, generally, I know we kind of asked this earlier, but generally, Bethany, how did it go for you all to do this week? Did you feel comfortable? Did it feel good? Was it maybe a little bit bumpy?
Yeah, it's always a little bit bumpy because it is so different than the regional rankings, because again, as we mentioned earlier, you lose a lot of the data of head-to-head competitions and common opponents. That's less frequent when you're comparing teams at the national level to have that information available. And there's such differences in those primary criteria of the teams that you are comparing, of really high winning percentages that are slightly lower but super high strength of schedules, and then all the different factors with ranked wins, ranked losses, and opportunities. So we had really productive conversations of working through those things and finding some consensus on how we wanted to compare teams.
Luke, same. How'd it go?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to celebrate, as we've this has been a topic of conversation on the national level here. It's just teams, going out and having cross-region competition at different events. I think even though it's less frequent, as Bethany mentioned, the times that we do have more data there with a head-to-head competition from different regions or common opponents is more frequent than it was. I think it's just really valuable. And so, it's a testament to coaches wanting to go out and play good teams and go out to some of these tournaments that draw teams from different regions. And I think it just adds to more of a national tournament for us.
I certainly know it's a ton of work. And I mean this in a genuine sense. Are you already somewhat doing this work, Luke, or is this an added level that now this top 16 has brought to the table for the committee in the middle of the week? I'm sure there's a pro and con here.
Yeah, this is the busiest week of our whole segment, just because, to take you through it, we're working on the regional level Sunday night into Monday when we have our regional rankings, and then that goes into Tuesday when we do our normal national call. And this week was the first week that we had results versus regional ranked opponents to consider. And so kind of going through that data took some extra time. And then we transitioned to Wednesday, where we're producing a top 16 based on almost a different process in the national selection process. And so that takes some learning as well for our committees, and then coming into the top 16 reveal today. And this week gets capped off with, I think, a really exciting regional ranking, because ranking number 3 is once ranked, always ranked, as we refer to it. So, we'll work towards that this Sunday. So these 8 days are just a really exciting time when it comes to our ranking, our selection process, and just building towards our national tournament.
I'll come back to the once ranked thing in just a minute, because I do want to talk about the process at the end. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Bethany, from your perspective, this is seemingly extra work, but it's also good practice.
It is, absolutely. And I think Luke said it really well. There's lots of conversation. You're having in-depth conversation on a variety of topics, regionally, nationally. And it sets us up for being prepared to have these conversations when it comes to selections. The value of this exercise is really important. It's important for first-year national committee members who haven't done this before. It gives us an opportunity to reflect on our processes and make sure that we feel good about what it is that we're doing in an exercise like this was.
Of course, the big conversation everybody has is about hosting. Obviously, from this top 16, we get a glimpse of the hosting scenarios or teams that are going to be in place. Men have priority, so maybe we can lean on the men's a little bit more, with obviously understanding that there are going to be changes. And Bethany, there's obviously the component where you have not priority the first weekend. We'll get to that in a moment, but I want to start with this. Okay, we've seen the top 16s. How much is regionality, though, going to dictate a lot of the hosting? For example, on the men's side, Luke, we saw one team out of Region 8 pop into this top 16, I believe. There's no way you're going to be able to put a pod together or a bracket together with only 1 or 2 hosts on the left-hand side, or let's call it middle of the country. You're going to have to find some hosts elsewhere. So great, this top 16, but it doesn't guarantee a lot.
It doesn't. Like we've said numerous times, the data changes. And so what really matters is where we are come Selection Sunday. I think that our committee has done an exemplary job just really trying to make our bracket as national as possible. And I think that commitment remains. Whatever we can do within reason and within our powers, we're going to make it a national bracket. We're going to spread things out as much as we possibly can and get to as many regions as we possibly can. But we're also going to honor the teams that have earned the opportunity to host whenever possible. So, there's a lot of layers that go into that, the bid process, and obviously the geography of Division III basketball, but it's not just lip service from our committee. We really want it to be a national bracket and make it as competitive as possible to crown our champion.
Certainly, but if you have a ton of teams in one area, you're going to have to find a host from some of those games. They may not be in this top 16. They may not be in the general top 16.
I can almost promise you that there's going to be hosts that are not in this top 16 because, again, it's 10 days away. But
sure, exactly.
Your point's well taken. There is a regionality to that at some point has to be considered. But we're going to do everything we possibly can to, not not let that happen and prevent it whenever we can.
Yeah. I certainly. I just want to just let people be aware that there are going to be some factors here that could play a role that, for all your well-intended plans, make it a wrinkle, and that you have nothing. There's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. You're going to have to make some tough decisions. That's all I basically wanted to allude to. Bethany, on your side,
I'm old enough that I participated in this tournament when it was very regional, and you couldn't get to the Final Four if you didn't beat everyone in your region. Sometimes playing a fourth or fifth time. And so like that, like it's been pointed out on social media, that's a very Division II model, and that's not what we're doing at the Division III level. And so rather than still finding the moments where we're not able to make it as national as we want, I would choose to celebrate the fact that we really are committed to making this a national tournament. And again, whenever we can, we will.
Oh, absolutely agree. I remember when it was 8 teams per region, it didn't matter what your resume looked like compared to anybody else out there. You were the 8th team in the region, you got in the tournament. Slam dunk. Move on. Team probably didn't. We don't have to dive into that memory. Bethany, from your perspective, again, women don't have the right to host. We did have some crossover there. Probably will have some crossover next year. We can certainly look at teams like NYU, Catholic, some others where both men and women are in this conversation. Men, if they need that team to host, if that team put in to host, that's another factor here. You're going to lose that ability. I've got a two-parter that I just thought of the second. I do want to get your opinions on. But Bethany, from your perspective, how are you already starting to look at that permutation and start to say to your committee, hey, FYI, we're going to have to build this with, I'm just saying, let's say NYU, but NYU is going to have to travel. We got to start thinking of that permutation.
We have not started those conversations just yet. We haven't felt a need to do it at this juncture. And as Luke talked about at one point, this has been a pretty busy week to begin with. We do have a conference call set for our bracketing subcommittee, which consists of more of the administrators within our committee. So we'll start having those conversations and what things could look like. I think it's early next week that we're having that call to just start talking through some different scenarios.
Administrators who are also coaches or just straight administrators? Just curious.
For the most part, it is straight administrators. I think we have one administrator coach.
Okay. Yeah, usually the women have a lot more. That's why I'm so used to that being a different scenario.
Yes.
Random question that I just thought of when I was thinking about it. And this is a what if. And it's one of those, oh my God, could they? What if a school who both teams were in place to host, but wanted to control it a little bit, said, hey, we're going to put in to host women. We're not going to put in to host men. Would you see through? How would you handle such a scenario where basically they're deciding who's going to host because they didn't put in for one of the genders? I don't know who wants to start with that one. I could see someone coming up with a little play like that. And we've seen others where, yeah, I'll go. We know of some other wild scenarios that have taken place, but so I was curious about that one.
Harkening back to our last conversation, Dave, and how we can trust in today's society, I would certainly hope that schools are above board when it comes to their bidding process and hosting process, and something that's that mischievous would be pretty disappointing.
I will say this too. there are times where it might not be mischievous, and you make an institutional decision. I know institutionally for us with some different sports where we potentially have an opportunity to host, if we have both the men and the women who could host, and we have, just take for example, if we've hosted for the women several times, even if it's a women's priority year, we may put in to host for the men because they haven't had that opportunity. So there might be some opportunities where we need to trust people, and there might be opportunities where they're making a genuine institutional decision based on whatever the departmental policy priorities are. And you can have those internal conversations too.
Fair point. That's why I wanted to ask it, because I do understand those conversations sometimes. But I also could see how it forces somebody's hand a little bit, which is just curious. We'll cross that bridge if we have to. How about that? All right. I know this has been a conversation Luke and I have had quite a bit, especially off air. Having more data at hand. To be fair, this is the first regional rankings we're seeing that actually have VRO data, but it's not based on actual ranks. It's based on you're just ranked. You were in the list. We don't get to see that till next week. And I can't tell you how many coaches and administrators I've chatted with over the last couple of years who are like, geez, we don't really know our position until the middle of the final week, when basically it's too late to really make any adjustments, whether it's we wanted to rest guys or we need to fight for it, whatever. It doesn't matter. But do you wish we could get this our VRO data at least out there sooner, Luke?
It's a layered conversation. Obviously, just to reiterate kind of how we got to where we are, going into that first public ranking and not having results versus regional ranked opponents created some very large sways that honestly, like, we weren't really comfortable with, and that, we didn't really think were accurate. I can think back a few years where one team was ranked regionally last in a 9-team region, and then once the RROs were considered, they went all the way to first. And so, the opposite was also true. And so that's what motivated the committee to put forth, this alphabetical ranking idea to the championships committee, which is now done for all sports. It's so recent that change happened. It's only been a few years that, as we know, it does take time to change things. And so I don't think anyone is married to this idea of the alphabetical rankings being, ranking one. I think at least for the men's committee, we would love to see this kind of continue to improve, and there is room for improvement. Some of the consideration is that, adding another week of work is not something that is going to be very popular as we talk about how busy this time frame is. So considering making our practice ranking the alphabetical ranking is something that's been discussed a lot that makes sense, but even that has some concerns that come along with it, just because, as we've mentioned, to varying degrees, these committees, these racks are new, and that practice ranking is a process that isn't always perfect because we are teaching people how to do this. And so, there's not a perfect answer, but I think I can speak for most people in saying that, where we are right now isn't as good as it can be, but where we go next, I think, is still up for kind of debate.
I really appreciate that. Great insight. Again, you and I've talked quite a bit off air, but I totally see all of that. It's not easy, to say the least. I just, obviously my perspective is coming from, oh, geez, we don't really know our standing until week 3. Bethany, anything to add to that?
No, I think Luke said it really well, and I think that he gave good perspective on how we got here, where we could go from here, and the potential downfall of people volunteering their time and adding another week. That's not to say there's not value to that. I think we could definitely explore the mock ranking being the alphabetical ranking. There's a lot of ways to try and adjust the process. I do understand the rationale of why people would want to have the RRO data sooner.
It's certainly an interesting convo. Speaking of RRO, we talked about this a little bit in the more formal show, but I do want to follow up in case anyone wasn't sure. When you did these top 16s, you used it from the data sheets that were produced on Sunday through games through Sunday. We can talk a little bit about how the process works at the very end of this in 10 days' time, but I want to be clear with everybody. the results versus regionally ranked opponents, you did not rerun that data to see what that number was based on the now week 2 rankings, correct?
Correct.
Okay. In case anybody's out there going, well, I'm not sure what they said. Yeah, this is the week 1 rankings data that you use for week 2. By the way, any criteria surprises in this process? Like you were talking about a difference between comparisons on a regional record or regional level, where certainly we see teams with common opponents and head-to-heads that play a big role. Bethany, did you guys have any surprises when going through the criteria that you ended up using something that maybe doesn't always come up on the national level?
No, I think for the most part, we really did not have a lot of overlap with common opponents or head-to-heads. We had a couple of instances. At times, it was, some of that data, it wasn't teams who we were directly comparing to one another. But in general, a lot of the decisions that we were making were based on win percentage, strength of schedule, and ranked wins and losses. That's not to say we didn't look at other factors, but we really did not have a lot of that data in our comparisons.
Luke, from your perspective, any surprises when you guys are doing it on the national level?
Yeah, I would say, I think almost everyone could take a pretty good stab at the first 8 or 9 schools and get those mostly right. I think after that, kind of 10 to 25 starts to get really, really, really close. And so, comparing those teams with just 3 data points becomes more challenging. And we talked about how the process works and how there's a representative from each region on the board. And so when you're comparing kind of 10 resumes there, it can get, really razor thin. And so when you do have a head-to-head that comes into play, it becomes, more important, because now you do have more data points to point to. And we actually had one in our rankings that came into play towards the end. So again, that people playing cross region and having some of those matchups to consider really helps, because, our system is meant for those regional comparisons.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective how you have all this great data when you do on the regional level, and then you lose some of it on the national level by chance. It's not by design. Did you guys dive into secondary criteria when just doing these top 16s? We'll just look at that primarily. Did you dive into secondary criteria to try and make some hard decisions, Luke?
Yeah, we've been very committed as a committee to make the decision on primary criteria whenever possible. Obviously, the entire total resume, as we pointed out, ad nauseum here is what we're considering. And, there has to be a really, really, really close comparison for us to want to even look at that secondary criteria. And so in this scenario, like Bethany referenced, we maybe, took a look a couple times, but, that doesn't mean we made the decision based on secondary. We've come back and say, hey, can we make this decision on primary criteria? Is there a better overall resume here? And that's kind of where we spend most of our time.
I have a follow-up on that, but I want to hear, Bethany, from your perspective, how is secondary used or not used?
Yeah, I think what Luke said is accurate for us as well. From what I can recall, we had one comparison that was extremely close, and there was a significant disparity in what the non-conference strength of schedule secondary criteria was. So we referenced that. That was not the end-all be-all of the decision, but it was an important note for us that there was a bit of a discrepancy there. We had a couple of really close comparisons, but we still were able to find ways to use the primary criteria to try and determine which team was going to be ahead of the other.
Luke, you said something there, trying to primarily use, using 2 words at the same time, primarily use the primary criteria without diving in the secondary. One of the interesting things that was added to the secondary was the non-conference SOS how many years ago to try and better explain someone's SOS, i.e., okay, you've got a low SOS. Why? Oh, look, your non-conference SOS is pretty high. Obviously, that is an indication of a conference that is pulling that SOS maybe towards 500 for whatever varying reasons. Every conference is different. So I appreciate that you're trying to stick to the conversation in primary, but do you ever dive to the non-conference SOS to better understand the SOS?
Yeah, I mean, we use secondary criteria, and that is the criteria that's prescribed to our committee to make these decisions. And so when we do think it's an actual tie on the front page and we can't make a decision, we very often will go to secondary criteria to decide that. And so that number, with all of its imperfections, is something that is then considered as, like you said, like if, it justifies someone really challenging themselves in their non-conference play. That's certainly something that's decided, but it really comes down to that number on the second page compared to someone else's number on the second page, not necessarily what it means about their primary criteria number. So
yeah, okay. So that's where I was kind of getting at, because it's interesting. I appreciate this because I think it's interesting. I think some of us will look at that SOS and go, okay, it's 510, make up a number. Why is it 510? Well, they play in X conference. Well, geez, we know why it's a 510. Let's go look at the non-conference to see if they did anything to bolster it, or if that 510 is basically based on their conference. You're not necessarily doing that. You're only doing that if you're stuck on the primary. So you're not diving into that SOS number to better understand what they did or didn't do out of conference in a general conversation, just to better inform you. You're only doing it if you've got a tight combo.
Yeah, we're only going to secondary criteria if we feel that we're virtually tied on primary criteria. If there's a way to make a decision on primary criteria, that's where we spend our time. And so in a one-off, like, we'll go to the secondary criteria and that'll be a tie too. And we'll have to, as a committee, figure out how to separate the two teams, be it a vote or be it something else. A point of pride that, our committee's had for a number of years here that I think we've been very transparent about is, a lot of times in those situations, we're looking for reasons to admit, reasons to, accept someone, and in that we're looking for quality. And so, we do drill down and look for quality results, and that's something that we certainly talk about as well.
I appreciate that, because that helps transition to my next question. We always talk about results versus regionally ranked opponents. It's not win-loss versus regionally ranked opponents, and that's total. It's not how many wins did you have, it's results. How much, Bethany, do you dive in? Okay, it's a win versus so-and-so who's ranked here. It's a win versus so-and-so who's ranked down here, etc.
Yeah, I think that's part of looking at the total body of work. And every region isn't the same. A 1 in one region might be a different quality 1 than a 1 in another region. Same thing, a 7 in one region might be a different quality opponent than a 7 in another region. Those are things that we talk about. And you've got the other primary criteria to provide some context to how those regions compare and how the ranked opponents compare. So we look at that total body of work. And so at times we talk about, with ranked opponents, you're looking at a lot of different things. You're looking at quality of wins. You're looking at quantity of wins. You're looking at opportunities. This goes back a little bit to what you were just talking about, Dave, with you've got a league that plays a home and away, and you have a very limited number of non-conference opportunities. You're tied to that league schedule. That may help explain why someone has fewer ranked opponent opportunities. And so maybe you only have 2 or 3 ranked opponents. What did you do against those couple of people compared to some other leagues where you're going to have 7, 8, 9, 10 opportunities to compete against ranked opponents? Those are important things that give some context to the conversation. And it's important to look at that full body of work there. That's the opportunity discussion. And there's some regions in general where there is less opportunity to have some of those ranked opponent competitions. That's something we talk about. That's not necessarily deciding in favor or against of a team one way or another, but it's something you have to consider in looking at the full body of work. So a lot of different things go into those ranked opponent discussions. Sometimes you can look at a team with 1 or 2 losses, and if those losses were to teams who are ranked 1 and 2, how are you looking at those compared to a team who maybe lost to 2 7s or maybe lost to opponents who aren't ranked opponents? Those are things we'll talk about too. And again, that in my opinion is the analysis of the full body of work that goes into Luke's analogy of the scale of, you've got someone who their sole loss on the season is to a 1 versus someone whose sole loss is to an unranked opponent. how's that tipping the scale in favor or against of one team or another in the context of all the other primary criteria as well.
Appreciate that insight. Luke, to that point, you come from an interesting conference where you guys get to play in multiple or represent multiple regions. Actually, you play in multiple regions too, but really it's about you get representatives in about a bunch of different regions. Is that similar conversation taking place? And in the example here, do you guys, say, hey, yeah, UAA team, they're playing teams in multiple regions versus an X team who is very isolated in theirs. Is that a similar conversation?
I think Bethany said it very well. And just to reiterate some of her points, I think that results is what the category is. It's not win-loss percentage, it's not quantity, it's results. And so we're drilling down and we're interpreting what those results are. And so we're not in the business of trying to discount criteria. I've talked in the past about, that being a slippery slope where we're not punishing a team that has a lot of results, but we are looking at those results to see what they tell us versus a team that has very less opportunity to get those results. It makes those results very important for them, right? And what they did against those ranked opponents, it is a limited sample size, and it's all the information we have. So we talk about this a lot. Like a team that is 4-4 might actually have more strength in that result versus ranked opponents category criteria than a team that's 4-2. And so, we spend a lot of time really diving into those and understanding what those results mean, who they're against, what region they're in. And to keep that scale analogy, we're putting a different size weight on the scale based on what we have been able to garner from that drill down in the results versus region ranked opponents criteria.
I appreciate that. For years we talked to committee chairs, and the reason we continue to do it is because every year, even if we know the system well or think we know the system well, we get a little more nuance about it that I think is helpful. And this is a great example of that. Appreciating that you are appreciating a school situation is as plain as I can make that. It's obviously more nuanced than that. Let's pivot to the final process here. Obviously, you'll have one more set of regional rankings that you'll do that will be public that are coming up next week on Tuesday. You'll do all that work. Racks on Monday, Tuesday, we get to see the week 3 regional rankings. Let's skip ahead. And obviously, let's skip ahead because, Luke, you touched on it. The old saying, the once ranked, always ranked, but the once ranked in week 3 and week 4, you get the total number there. I know the process well. I want it just to be spelled out if we can. I'm going to paraphrase quickly. When you get to the end, Rax will do a 4th week of rankings. You all will look at it. You'll make whatever adjustments you deem fit. You come up with your final week 4 rankings. But then you reset the data, correct? So the results versus regional rank, this is an example of where that is reset. So you see that updated before you make your final decision on rankings. Have I got that right? Is there any part of it that's a little different? Luke, we'll start with you. I should have teed that up.
No, that's correct. So the next rankings that come out, if you have a result versus a regionally ranked opponent, that'll be present on your final resume. All right, we will do one more round of rankings week 4, and those teams will also be on your resume. So right now, if you're rooting for a Pool C candidate, you're really hoping that they get the right team ranked this week, and then honestly, that team moves out and they have a new result that favors their resume move in for week 4. And so, we again, this data is daily, it's to the minute, and so and that's obvious. I think when the pundits pick their Pool C selections, I think that last ranking and understanding what that ranking 4 is probably where they get some of their near misses.
It's us trying to extrapolate before we can see them. Yeah. I mean, we don't get to see that data official until after the brackets are released. And so for us, it's trying to dive in and figure out what adjustments happened. Where did that move happen? And yes, the impact of it. And Bethany, you and I were talking off air. You already see that. There are teams in certain regions who had, let's say, 3-3 versus regionally ranked opponents, but now one of those ranked teams is gone. They're going to lose that data. Now, at the end, again, if they're in week 3, they'll keep it. But my point is that adjustment makes an impact on that data number, and that changes the conversation.
It does, absolutely. And to Luke's point, people who are hoping for the pool C's, all the teams who are in kind of that 5, 6, 7 spot in the regional rankings, they really want them in week 3. And then they're hoping some other people they played are in week 4, right? That's boosting their ranked wins data there. It does change. And that's why the process with the racks and those regional rankings are so critical, because that information matters. That's why it matters that we do a good job with those rankings on a week-to-week basis. That's why it matters if teams are still winning games. Focusing on your next game and winning that game is going to continue to have an impact on all of the data that's presented when we're ultimately making selections at the end.
We may talk again before we get to the selection process, but I have the opportunity. Bethany, unfortunately, this next question does kind of look squarely at your conference. Games being played on Sunday. The racks are having to do the work in the morning and come up with a bunch of what-ifs possibilities. If X wins, then this is our ranking. If Y loses, then this is our ranking. If X lost and Y won, this is, etc. I know a lot of committees and a lot of sports kind of wish the rankings could be done on a day that there are no games. Bethany, I'm kind of curious your perspective from a conference that prides itself in trying to have the final games of the regular season. And I'm saying that with a tongue in my cheek.
I would not say we pride ourselves on...
I said tongue in cheek.
I would not say we pride ourselves on having the final game. I would say we pride ourselves on having an extraordinary conference tournament. And I'm a big believer in what it is that we do. It's actually funny I asked this, Dave, because I was talking with someone recently and we were talking about selections and all of this stuff. And they said, I really wish that we could mandate conferences don't have championships on Sunday. I said, well, I'm not going to be an advocate of that because we're the people who typically cause problems. And I really like the format of our conference tournament. I think it's great. There's workarounds. So we have if scenarios. And so when we meet with our racks, just take the ODAC, for example, because that's an easy example. You just gave it to us. Our championship on the women's side isn't going to be till a 3:30 start this year. So we will be one of the last games to end. And so the 2 teams that we have in, we'll have a scenario with our rack. If team A wins, what would our rankings be? If team B wins, what would our rankings be? So it ends. So we're prepared. And so what we do as a national committee then is we end up going through some of the regions where all of their games are complete and we do those final rankings. Then we're just waiting for region 6 till those games are complete. We're not having another call at the rack at 5:30 to try and determine what our rankings are. We've already done all that work because we've got the if scenarios of if team A wins versus if team B wins. And so then we just plug that in. Then we go through as a national committee, assess region 6, and then come up with our final rankings there based on the if scenario that we prepared for. So there's workarounds to it. And doing those final rankings takes some time. So we have time to work up to it because of all the leagues that do have games that are complete. So there are regions that we can go ahead and do prior to some of those final games being complete.
We literally have the polar opposite on this call because Luke comes from a conference, doesn't even have a conference tournament. The only one left in the NCAA. And for solid reasons. We understand the complexity of the UAA as well. So Luke, I'm kind of curious from your perspective. Do you wish you had games on the final day or do you wish this kind of could be a little more buttoned up?
Yeah, at our level, it's all about the student athlete experience. And so as Bethany mentioned, the ODAC tournament is one of the special things out there. And, I don't want to see that changed for anything. So we are very unique in not having a conference tournament. That's always a topic of conversation and who knows what direction that's going. But it's certainly, there's so many layers to Division III. I mean, one of the things as a result is we have less games played than someone who just played 3 tournament games. And so whether it's a provisional member or a UAA team, like those are things that are just the inherent advantages and disadvantages that we talk about.
No, great example. Yeah, you guys finished with 25 games. A team in the ODAC finishes with like 29, I think, if they get all the way to the title game. If they come through the hard way, they'll get finished with 29, I should say.
Correct.
If they're one of the bottom 4 seeds, that'd be a story. And probably not exactly up for at-large anyway in that scenario, but still.
We actually had a team on the women's side a couple of years ago who played the first round game and ended up winning the league championship.
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, they took care of the AQ. Speaking of which, Luke, we saw this last year on the men's side especially. Upsets in the conference tournaments can wreak havoc. And if you are sitting somewhere around, let's say, a 3, 4, or 5 on the regional rankings in week 3, you want everybody ahead of you who can possibly win to allow you to float up. But man, Luke, the conversations must be tough, because I remember from last year, we were talking about teams at the end trying to pick the last 2 that would have been middle of the selection conversations in any quote unquote normal year. Am I guessing the committee also roots for things to go as chalk as possible?
Well, we have 22 pool Cs this year, so we're looking forward to that larger number. But wherever you draw the line as the last team in, and however those bid thieves, quote unquote, impact that, it's always tough being the first 4 teams out or whatever number you get to. So I don't think that changes the equation based on having more at-large teams this year or bid thieves. There's always going to be people who were near misses that are disappointed to be home, and there's teams that just got in that are just ecstatic to be playing in the tournament. And I just think that's the nature of having the NCAA bracket that we have, and it also adds to the excitement. So there's a lot of emotions that come down to it on the final day. And yes, if you're a bubble team, you are rooting for chalk when it comes to conference championships. And last year there was not a lot of chalk. So that equation is not going to change no matter how many pool Cs we have.
There was a lot of chalk dust as it was wiped off the damn board, left, right, and center. Bethany, a little less on the women's side, but we're starting to see more parity on the women's side. We're starting to see this go a little deeper. Yes, there's the NYUs, the Transylvanias, right now Rhode Island College, but even, Scrantons and all the like. But we're starting to see more and more losses creep in on really good teams on the women's side. This is starting to get a little bit more interesting too.
Yeah, it's fun. We've really enjoyed watching how things have progressed over the season, and teams who might be ranked a little bit lower going and winning big games, and it changes the discussion from one week to the next. Resumes change, and it makes things really interesting in those comparisons. So it's fun that there's so many quality teams on the women's side who are in contention for competing in the national championship.
I don't think I dove into this. I apologize to kind of go backwards on a topic on hosting. And Bethany, it's going to impact you a little bit more than maybe Luke. But Luke, it could impact you guys on the second weekend, of course. The women will have priority second weekend. Men have priority first weekend. I'll stick with the first weekend because that's the easiest one, because you know who the teams are. There's no results that change everything, Bethany. But how do you structure a team that Luke has told you that school will be hosting on the men's side, and so the women can't host? How do you structure the bracket before you get that information, i.e. that information's not relevant, and then figure out where you're going to send them in that pod? How does that whole process, I know you haven't dove into it, but how are you expecting that to work? Basically, where does a host who can't host end up going in your mind?
In my opinion, I think that your biggest consideration is you don't want to significantly disadvantage these teams who've worked all season to be a high-ranked team, right? So you're not sending them hopefully 400 miles away. Part of it's going to depend on who puts bids in to host. And then how can you structure things while creating a national bracket, which I think Luke has talked about. We try to be very intentional in that regard as well. So you don't want to send them super far away from where they're located. At the same time, you want to create a competitive national bracket. So I think there's a lot of things that go into it. It's a tricky equation when you can't just slot someone into host because they're a top seed. But you need to acknowledge the fact that they've done a whole lot of work to get to the point of being a top seed.
Where's the right place to send them, though? Is it the next seed in that pod? Is it the third seed in that pod, as long as they're on the opposite side of the bracket? Or is it the fourth seed in that pod, even though they're going to take on the top seed?
I think you probably have a lot of people with very different opinions on that.
Yeah, possibly.
I think a lot of that, too, is going to be dictated by who's putting in bids to host. In general, you probably don't have a whole lot of people who are some of the lower seeds in those pods putting in bids to host because they probably don't expect to host. That may vary, right? This goes back to the point that's been made already that people should put into host, even if they think they're an outside shot. So that's going to dictate some of it. But again, I think at the end of the day, it comes back to making sure that you're cognizant of where you're sending them. Should it be the 2 or the 3 seed? If I'm the 1 seed, I'm going to say, no, it shouldn't be the 2 seed. If I'm the 2 seed, I'm going to say, yeah, absolutely. So I think that's something that we just need to work through as a national committee. And again, I don't recall exactly what the history is of how we've done that in the past. It's only an every other year thing that you really need to consider that. And so I'll be honest, I don't recall how we've handled that previously. Luke may have some insight on his side.
And there may be nuances every year that change even what you did 2 years ago. Luke, yeah, you guys did it last year, but you'll have to consider it this year for the second weekend. How does that, or do you foresee that impacting how you bracket? You're having to make decisions based on hoping results hold to some degree based on your seeding. Or is that something you just, there's only so much you can handle on that second weekend in terms of how many flights you could potentially have and all that the hosting side's going to have to take a back seat to results?
Yeah, we don't, obviously, as you know, we don't really announce the hosting sites for the second weekend until we have all the information. And so, yeah, we try to build a bracket to favor our top seeds and with whatever regional considerations possible. But, when it comes down to the 4 teams that make up that pod, it's almost like a whole new equation in week 2, which is why the brackets the hosts for those second weekends don't get announced until after the first weekend's complete. So it's not a perfect science. To Bethany's points, like we try to reward the teams that have earned it to whatever degree we can, given our limitations and restrictions.
That all said, Bethany, a couple of years ago in women, when it was this scenario where the women couldn't host the first weekend, it felt like one little detail got missed, and that one pod and another pod, if they had swapped, would have allowed Christopher Newport to host the second weekend, which they couldn't do the first weekend. They got sent to Johns Hopkins. Instead, Tufts is in their same grouping. That's more than whatever the mileage was at the time, because I know we bounced between 600 and 500. And it forced Christopher Newport to have to go somewhere else the second weekend, even though they were the top seed. I know that was felt to be a miss. And I think the committee was pretty forthright in saying, yeah, if we had swapped this, we would have avoided that. Is that still on the mind of everybody? Will that still be cognizant that you look ahead and at least go, well, who are our top seeds? If this were to be chalk, we got to make sure that whoever didn't host that first weekend isn't going to get kind of the short end of the stick if everything is status quo.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. And I think those are accurate statements. Those are things we're extremely cognizant of. The other piece of this is, what we are or are not allowed in terms of flights. And
absolutely,
and having an awareness of how many potential flights you would have that second weekend. Again, some of this that comes into play is who's putting into host. And, that's something that has to be considered. That is not going to be the decision maker. But it's something that you're aware of how different situations could play out. And again, I think the flights play into this as much as anything, which is a really important consideration. And that, we could go back to the discussion we've talked about having some more money available in what the Champs Committee is discussing in terms of how that money is going to be allocated moving forward. And for us, we would like to have some flexibility with flights. Not that we're asking for a significant number of flights, but flexibility for flights when we need it. And to your point, I think the CNU situation from a couple of years ago is a great example of when we would have liked to have had the opportunity to have one more flight, which played into things. To be perfectly candid, that was a factor in how that all played out, right? Were we a little short-sighted? Some people might think that. I don't know that was necessarily the case, and it certainly wasn't intentional. But if we'd had one more flight, that would have solved that problem.
Oh, of course.
Having the discussion about how things could play out in terms of flights and what we're going to be allocated is a really, really important piece of this too, in the spirit of trying to create the best competitive national bracket possible, creating opportunities for student athletes to play outside of their normal regional competition, and trying to create situations where again, based on teams who put together really strong resumes, they're rewarded for that in the spirit of a full national competition.
I know we're tight on time. I know Luke has to get going. I just a couple quick follow-ups. What have either of you gotten a sense of what your flight limitation, for lack of a better description, is going to be? Have they kind of said, listen, we'd really like to keep this to 5 flights. We'd really like to keep this to 4 flights. Or is it kind of a little bit more fluid, Luke?
Yeah, there is not a flight limit, right? And so
right,
we're never given a number. Obviously, I think we're given a charge to try to limit flights as much as possible. I think hopefully I'm not oversharing here, Bethany, but Bethany and I have had some conversations that, our goal this year is to get told no as many times as possible. We want to really push and do everything we can to, fight for the best national tournament and the best kind of bracket that we can possibly put together, and make sure that if not, we're told no as a result. So
I feel bad for your liaisons.
we're gonna push the envelope here and try to do everything we can to have some exceptional tournaments coming up.
By the way, quickly, it's not necessarily your liaisons who are telling you no, right? They go and check with someone else. Is that correct? It's not like the liaisons sit there going, I've got the power. It's more about someone above them who is going to sign off on it. Do I have that right?
It's a great question, Dave.
My understanding is there is, the person above who's signing off on these things. There are written stipulations about how hosting decisions are supposed to be made. And that was something a couple of years ago that was referenced, and understandably, I'm a policies and procedures person, much to the dismay of some of our staff sometimes, but I'm very much a policies and procedures person. So I understand this stuff is written down, and that is, we need to hold to that. That's the expectation. I totally understand that. At the same time, I think that's why some of these conversations on the front end of scenarios that could present themselves and making sure we're covering our bases so that we don't have a situation where a flight makes a really big difference in who is and is not hosting presents itself and we haven't already vetted that. I think those conversations and that proactive work is really important so that the person above who is going to sign off on X number of flights can do so if we provide rationale and we're planning accordingly.
Quick follow-up too on the process. Every once in a while we'll hear in some sport they say, well, they're resetting the SOS data and they're resetting some of this other data to look at things in week 2 to make decisions, or weekend 2 to make decisions on hosting. Are you all resetting that data? Is that SOS data reset, or are you all looking at how the final rankings, final data points, et cetera, from the regular season will impact your decisions for the second weekend? Bethany, we'll start with you.
We don't reset anything.
Luke?
To my knowledge, and I haven't been part of many of those conversations, that data is not reset. It's end of season data that we're considering as far as who earns the right to host, and then obviously all the other considerations that go in with that.
Yep, I just wanted to get it out there in case anybody was curious, because we do hear that every once in a while in some other sports. And I've always argued, well, it's the committee that changed that data. Like your decisions on who they play impacts how that data. So it seems a little weird. I just wanted to get out of there. Again, I know we could go into a lot of other topics. I'm hoping we maybe can get you guys on one more time before we kind of see the brackets. And I know you're busy enough, so we'll let you go. I know Luke's got to run. So we'll just go with final thoughts on all this. The top 16 process, week 2 process, whatever you want to have your final thoughts. I'd love to hear from what your thoughts are, Luke.
Get your bids in, please. Please get your bids in. That's my last plea on that. But just really excited to the finish of the season. As we know, conference tournament time coming up right around the corner, and it's just, as a D3 basketball fan, it's fun to watch results, and whatever you're kind of hanging on as far as a Pool C opportunity or just rooting for your team. It's a great time of year, and just enjoy it and know that there's committees behind this who are doing everything they can to get it right and to produce the best possible championship that we can, given the restrictions we have.
Well said. Bethany?
Thanks, Dave, for the time at the top 16. I think it builds excitement, and that's the thing we've consistently heard is feedback over the last couple of years. I think it gets people geared up for tournament time, and it's an exciting opportunity to promote some teams who've had really successful seasons. And there's a lot of other teams right on the cusp of that 16th spot who also should be acknowledged and celebrated. We have a lot of really talented teams out there. And I think it's exciting to have this sort of publicity for Division III men's and women's basketball, and the folks who take time to analyze this stuff and question our decisions, at the same time promote some really talented student athletes, because there's a lot of people invested in providing positive experiences, from obviously coaches and administrators and institutional folks to all the folks at the NCAA. And we're excited to be a part of that. Our national committee, we're excited to provide opportunities for student athletes to have these experiences, and we're looking forward to providing the best experiences we can. It's an exciting time of year, and we're all pretty pumped about what's to come in the next couple of weeks.
Couldn't agree with you more. It's about making this a bigger deal, and continue to make it a big deal. Wish we could do this in more sports in Division III. But thank you for your time. I know it's quite a big chunk out of your day of what is already a busy week. So Luke and Bethany, thank you very much for joining us. Good luck with the rest of the process. We'll look forward to catching up with you down the road. And again, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Luke Fulkertsy and Bethany Danley joining us here exclusively on the Hoopsville Hotline. Once again, thank you to the committee chairs for joining me on the show. Really good insight from them. We should let you know, if you didn't know, some of the secrets of television production, because I kind of treat this a little bit like television production. We talked to them earlier today, so we didn't have a lot of specifics about teams for a handful of reasons. We'll have our pundits dive into some of that here coming up. But I thank Luke and Bethany for joining me and spending quite a bit of their time today putting those segments together for the show. If you missed the top 16s, well, it's on social media, but we will get you up to date ourselves with the pundits. We'll start with the men's side when we come back. Matt Snyder and Ryan Scott will join me to give their takes on the Week 2 rankings and our first look at the top 16s. And then later, Scott Peterson and Riley Zayas will join us and do the same on the women's side. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com and our friends at Sport Tours International from the NABC studios. Back with more after this. The National Association of Basketball Coaches is the nation's premier professional development and advocacy organization for basketball coaches at every level. The NABC strives to serve as the voice for coaches on national issues while advancing the core value of leadership, service, advocacy, education, and inclusion. To learn more about the NABC and to become a member, visit NABC.com and follow the NABC on social media at NABC 1927. That's NABC.com or NABC 1927 on social media.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's nearly 850 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over 2 decades. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're D3Hoops.com at www.D3Hoops.com.
If I lose, I'll respond with respect.
If I win, I'll back it up with humility.
If I fail, I'll rise up with honor. It's tough for us to put it all on the line.
Don't undo my hard work with poor sportsmanship.
Respect. It's the name of the game.
Coach of the Year, Administrator of the Year, All-America Team, Wade Trophy. The WBCA doesn't just honor coaches, but players, administrators, and much more. The WBCA strives to honor those who have contributed to the advancement of women's basketball. Celebrate the present, honor the past, look to the future.
Welcome back to this Hoopsville special edition on this Thursday evening. We're not talking to any coaches tonight. Well, I guess Luke Filkertzi counts as a coach. He was the men's committee chair. Bethany Danley, of course, the women's committee chair. Again, thanks for their time. We found out the top 16s. They were announced and finished up about an hour ago. Now we try and dive into what does this all mean? Let's do a little bit of homework, okay? A quick reminder of some things. We did this earlier. We'll start with the men. We'll do some of the reminders on the women's side coming up. Women's side, reminder, the selection show is coming up on the 26th. This is on the men's side. It'll be at 1 p.m. First and second round games will be March 1st and 2nd. Sectionals are 8th and 9th. Semifinals coming up on Thursday the 14th at 5:30 and 8 o'clock on NCAA.com. Championship will be Saturday, March 16th at 4 o'clock at the Allen County War Memorial Coliseum. That's going to be on CBS Sports Network. Reminder, bids to host are due tomorrow as we look at the top 16. Starting with Hampton, Sydney, then Randolph, Macon, Widener, John Carroll, Case Western, New York University, Oswego, Trinity, Texas, your top 8. Trine, Trinity, Connecticut, Guilford, Cal Lutheran, Keene State, Rowan, Platteville, and Catholic round out the 16. That's if the data was done on Sunday, 2 weeks ahead of when the season ends, and we were determining a tournament that were to start traditionally tomorrow, Friday. This is where we would kind of see most of the seeds, most of the hosts, et cetera, et cetera. It's not foolproof because, as we all know, there's other things in there. And we talked to Luke Filkertzi specifically about the geography of things, because if you notice in that top 16, there's nobody from Region 9, and there's only one team from Region 8. Joining us on the Hoopsville hotline to break it all down, it's our pundits and our data guys. It's Matt Snyder and Ryan Scott, who admittedly have dove into this far more than I have. I'll plead absolute guilt that when I get this information well ahead of time, at least in the grand scheme of things, the NCAA committee, the NCAA broadcast shows, we get the data maybe 3 hours before we can have to put a broadcast on the air. I got 36. But I have so much work to do that I honestly did not look into all the information. I didn't have time. So I let these guys do it. Matt Snyder, I'll start with you. You guys were the ones, you and your brother tried to predict, and I purposely stayed away from your show. No disrespect. I stayed away because I didn't want to kind of get a hint at what you were thinking and have any of my script be written in a bad way or give anything away. So your reactions to all this.
Yeah, well, I was celebrating, with text because we got the first 8 or 10 correct. And then Luke comes on the show and says, well, anybody could have gotten the first 10 correct. Then we had to start having the tough decisions. So I think that's what we'll see is I think the decisions were a little bit straightforward at the top.
He may have listened to your show.
And then there were some tough, they're really splitting hairs, I think, at the end. Looking into the quality of wins, I think we saw that was very important. There's not a ton of head-to-heads. They mentioned that there's a few that maybe factored in. But yeah, it's really, really tough at the bottom of the top 16. Everyone in this whole list has great resumes, right? That's why they're in the top 16. So you're really getting down into the nitty-gritty about what are the differences between these resumes and what are you going to rank one above another.
Yeah, I think this was more nitty-gritty this year than last year. I thought last year was a little bit more understood. And that's parity. I think that's all the losses that we're seeing in men's basketball. Ryan, your reactions?
Yeah, I mean, I felt the same way. I think we'll talk about as we go down. There really is kind of a demarcation after number 10. Those first 10 resumes are pretty strong, and maybe the order would have been a little bit different, depending on who was making that call. But for the most part, that's where things start to get a little tricky. And we were kind of hoping that maybe we just walk through 11 through 16 and kind of talk about, what were they thinking and what may have been one place or another. But we did definitely see beating a good team is going to carry a lot of weight this year. That's going to be a big deal. And I mean, something that maybe you can get in a conference tournament, but nothing you can do about that for the most part at this point in the season.
That's true. I'm going to be interested diving into this after the fact and maybe even seeing next week's regional rankings to pick up what else that may be diving into. I noticed some teams aren't in regional rankings that have some pretty good win-loss percentages. But again, after a non-ranked, results versus regionally ranked, that's maybe having some effect here, and we have to wait till next week's to really get a sense of where teams are slotted. As we've talked about, we have to really wait till next week to really understand where everybody's positioning in. I'm impressed that you guys thought Widener up at 3 wasn't a surprise. I initially got the data. I remember going, whoa, that's pretty high for Widener. Granted, dove in. You certainly see it. Guilford being at 11, I think, was pretty telling. It shows that Guilford has certainly improved their resume this season versus past seasons where they've been on the bubble. What jumped out at me was that Wisconsin-Platteville is the only team in from that region, and they're at 15, which also tells you just how much the CCIW is eating themselves alive, Matt.
Yeah, it was interesting. Platteville was a team I expected to be a little bit higher in these rankings. And actually, they moved to Region 9 now, away from the CCIW.
Oh, good point.
There
you.
are one
Right.
Region 9 team and no Region 8 teams. But I think you're very right. You talked about geography in the show. We're going to need another host in there between Platteville and Shrine. Like that's the only 7, 8, 9, getting away from Cleveland, Region 7 teams, but like Western kind of Midwest teams. I think we're going to need another host there. But yeah, I was a little bit surprised to see Platteville down at 15. I thought they'd be a little bit higher, but I think overall it makes a little bit of sense where they were.
Yeah, I didn't see anything major about it. Ryan, per the hosting, just extrapolating out, we've seen the ARC be really good, but they've also beat each other so much that they may have to host because they need a host, but they're playing themselves out of it. You have St. John's, but their resume's taken a bit of a hit because they don't play a lot of out-of-conference games. Again, the CCIW has been a little bit of a kind of chaos theory. As we've said, we're going to have to find a host here, and I'll dive into this later, but that also means, hey, somebody in the top 16 is not going to host.
Yeah, I mean, that may not be true, right? Because I think because of how strong the ARC is, someone is going to win that tournament, which is going to mean that they're beating 2, if not 3 regionally ranked teams.
Good point.
Let alone whether, some of them still have another one to play. So conceivably, somebody in that conference could win 4 more regionally ranked games without losing one.
Great
going
point.
to improve their winning percentage. It's very likely that one of those teams, whoever wins the conference tournament, will slip into that top 16 without much problem.
That's a great point. And we got to remember too, some of these teams, you got 3 ODAC teams here. Well, arguably, let's say Guilford loses in the semifinals. They aren't going to pick up that extra one. Maybe that's a team that slides out of the top 16 because of that. As a result, that's the problem with having multiple teams from a region/conference in this top 16. You are going to hurt yourself later on the resume. Matt, what else jumped out at you about this top 16? And we'll, as you answer that, we'll try and take a peek at it as well.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest thing, and maybe Ryan mentioned this already, your results versus regionally ranked, they're really diving in, and who you beat is very important. I think if you don't have a lot of quality in those regionally ranked wins, and by quality I mean probably teams that are like number 1s in their region, or maybe number 2s, you're not going to be kind of in these hosting positions. I don't think there are very few teams in the top 16 that really don't have signature wins. And maybe to that end, it was almost surprising that a team like Hood couldn't find their way into this top 16. Now, I understand they were blocked by Catholic in the regional rankings, but Hood has some really good wins now. So even though their winning percentage isn't overwhelmingly great compared to the others on this list, their strength of schedule is solid, and they've beaten Widener, they've beaten Cal Lutheran, they've beaten Catholic. So I think those are the types of wins that the committee is going to be looking for. So a team like Hood, if they continue to improve their resume, if they keep winning, do well in the conference tournament, they're a team that could maybe slide into this kind of like final real top 16.
I'd counter that they lost last time they played Widener, and if they beat Widener a second time, that will be a huge boost for Hood. So to your point, yes, but I think the loss actually probably hurt them.
Yeah, I mean, but it's a really, it's a good loss, though. I mean, quote unquote,
I agree.
Loss. They're not going to ding them too much.
I just mean it wiped out the Widener win.
Yeah, I think maybe like a 1-1 there, though, is a net positive against a team like Widener up at that high. It's probably not like a net wash 0. It's probably still overall good.
And I was just going to mention Hood is a good example, I think, of the difference between when they picked this top 16 and when they did the regional rankings, right? So they were not looking at, or not able to, when they did the regional rankings, look at the strength of those RROs, right? But Luke did say they went back for the top 16 and looked at the strength. And one of the reasons I want to point that out is because I think based on the criteria and the way they picked the top 16 today and the emphasis they put on having really high quality wins, I suspect Hood would have been in front of Catholic had they been able to evaluate the strength of those RROs. And because Hood was not above Catholic, they were not able to get to the table, so to speak, today for the top 16.
Yeah.
And so I suspect, this is just from lack of data at this point in the season, right? This is data they're going to have next week, and we'll be able to see what that change is like. But even just from, Tuesday to Wednesday, when they're going from regional rankings to picking the top 16, the criteria is changing a little bit, and that can actually have an effect on the teams that are in.
Granted, they're using the same data, but your point is good in the sense that they're looking at results versus regionally ranked opponents unranked. Like they're just a bland list. And so you can't evaluate the quality, as you point out. That's a great point.
Because Hood's got wins over Widener and Kowloon, plus the head-to-head over Catholic. It's very if they were able to dig into that on Tuesday, it's very, very unlikely that would.
Yeah, it's very possible, order, so. and it gets to the point too of trying, as we talked with both committee chairs, trying to get week one. And I applaud Luke for saying this. Listen, this was our idea. We wanted the alphabetical rankings because we felt that the rankings were incomplete with not the right data. But it's a work in progress. Maybe we need to massage this, and maybe and he was forthright about maybe we can go to, and I think Bethany too, about going to the mock rankings, maybe being available for that data hole, but also saying how that's flawed. It's not a perfect thing, which I agree with too. So we'll see where this evolves to. Ryan, what else jumped out at you? Maybe not just about the top 16, but about the rankings in general.
One of the things that was interesting, and Luke mentioned again, that they're looking at results, right? So losses are going to matter here. One of the teams, the one team that Matt didn't have in was Rowan. And if we look at that resume, they do have an incredibly high non-conference strength of schedule, which may have come into play because some of these resumes were so close. But one of the reasons it's so high is those 4 regional losses they have are to really, really good teams, including like Randolph-Macon and some of those that are very high. And so even though they don't have like a major win as some of these teams do, that all of their losses are way up there. The same thing for Kowloon, right? Kowloon's only lost 3 games on the season, if I'm not mistaken. All 3 are against regionally ranked teams, and it's, Randolph-Macon and Hood that are kind of in this top 16 conversation to begin with. And so I think even those losses are going to matter. The other one in this case that we were curious about is why Tufts wasn't in, because they have 5 regionally ranked wins, including over Keene State, which, is a top one. But I was thinking as they're going through, most of their regionally ranked wins are against Region 2, which is relatively weak. And when they played some of their conference opponents that are ranked in their own region, they didn't get those wins. And I wonder if the committee's looking at saying, you had the opportunity to beat these good teams and you didn't do it. And the ones you did beat are kind of lower on our scale, if that didn't factor into the decision in some way.
Well,
too.
Also, you're not winning in your own region. You're not winning in your own conference. You're not doing yourself any favors in the one place you can bolster yourself, which is in the region. And they're hurting themselves there by doing so. And Tufts is a good team. It's a very good team, though. Granted, this is interesting. The conference is really beating them up a bit. And we'll see how that plays out. Do you see any surprises coming? Do you think that the rankings we saw and these top 16s, that we're going to get anything that's maybe brewing that's going to surprise some people in the next 10 days?
I mean, Matt would jump in there.
I will jump in, I guess. For me, I think the good thing is we saw 2 weeks of rankings. This one was actually listed as ranked order. I think if you looked at those and dove in, you could really get a sense of how they would value the top 16. And I think someone like me getting a fairly accurate picture means that they have been consistent now comparing regions to each other of what they've been valuing. So they have been showing us a good picture of what they are doing. So I think that makes a lot of sense. As far as surprises, that you hinted at this in the show, we're looking at data from last week. Teams are now going to fall out. The regionally ranked opponents are going to completely shift. I look at a team like John Carroll. Now, I think they're completely safe, both in the tournament, obviously, and probably in the final top 16. But they're going to lose 2 wins against Marietta and a win against Penn State Harrisburg, who we just saw were not in the regional rankings. That's 3 regional ranked wins there. And their other 2 against Mount Union, who have since suffered some defeats And so their resumes are going to suffer. So, these resumes are not locked in. The data changes. They've said that several times. So we're going to see some numbers change as far as regionally ranked win totals because teams are falling out. And I think that's one reason why they want to see those top quality wins, because those are rock solid wins that are not going to probably fall out at the end of the day.
Not to mention John Carroll also lost themselves, right?
Yeah,
so their resume is going from, what's recognized here as the fourth best resume, but it may look a lot more like Platteville or Catholic next week, which were the last two teams in. That's going to be an interesting one.
I'm actually curious. I want to double check who last year's top 16 were and just quickly remind myself of how many of those teams ended up not hosting per se. Oh, I called up this year's. That's not helpful, Dave. Here we go. Macon was 1, St. Joseph 2, Middlebury 3, Swarthmore 4, Rowan 5, Stockton 6, Williams 7, Mount Union 8, Carroll, then Wheaton, Hamden, Sydney, Christopher Newport, Oshkosh, Case Western, WashU, and Johns Hopkins. For the most part, not a ton there didn't host, even though the men did not have first priority. But it's not a guarantee, as you point out, because the numbers do change. And I think that's the real crux of it. You can literally have a good resume this week and have an average resume next week, because teams do slide out, and then those teams could slide back in. And suddenly in week 3, week 4, you get those numbers back. That's the evolution of this. That's the most interesting part of it, I think. By the way, I did want to ask you this. When I've always been doing kind of this dive into SOS numbers and better understanding a team's resume, I'll jump into that secondary criteria and look at the non-conference SOS to better understand what that SOS means. And I think Luke was pretty clear. They don't do that unless their data tells them they've got to go look somewhere else for a decision-making process. They're not looking at that SOS as I thought maybe they were, or misunderstood, and looking at the non-conference go, okay, you got a 510 SOS, and your non-conference is a 610. Obviously, blah, blah, blah. No, they don't even look at the non-conference until they absolutely have to. And I think maybe I've been using it a little too quickly, or at least using it in a way I shouldn't be.
I think, especially having been on this, our mock selection show the last couple of years, that we perhaps consider resumes tied a lot quicker than the committee is willing to do that.
Fair point.
So the one today that I thought may have done that was the Platteville Rowan one. And if you look at that, the records, same number of wins, Rowan has one extra loss. So that puts their winning percentage just slightly lower. Their SOS is just basically identical, and they've got very, very similar RROs, just in terms of even the strength of them and the number of them. Like, it's very, very difficult to distinguish between those two teams. We were asking, why did Rowan end up ahead of Platteville? And in that case, the non-conference SOS would make a really good rationale for that. And I don't see a whole, Matt asked before, like, why is Platteville so far down? That's the only thing I can think of is, one, they lost the head-to-head with Keene, and Luke mentioned that there was a head-to-head that came into play towards the end, and that's the only one I could find that he may have been talking about. Yeah.
Agreed.
So then Platteville's dropped down there, and now they're compared with Rowan, and it's got to go to a tiebreaker essentially to that secondary criteria, which Rowan wins.
No, it's a great point.
Yeah. No, I looked at that same example, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds on that one, but I still thought that there was like a 30-point winning percentage advantage for Platteville. And like you said, the strength of schedule is essentially tied. I think the regionally ranked results look pretty similar. So I was surprised they just didn't go with the 30 points of winning percentage and go Platteville. That was really the only one where I didn't quite follow the thread for why one specific team was above the other. The other ones, I think I could all see why, especially when you consider the ranked win quality into the factor.
Yeah, Sir Quadraki said
we're not clear on, Dave, and I wonder, I don't know if you have any more indication on that, is in previous years, and I would say maybe even before COVID, we would hear committee members talk a lot about numbers of wins, right? I know that winning percentage is the actual criteria, but there would be times when it would be, like 18-9 versus, 16-5, and they'd say, well, 18 is better than 16. I don't know how much that comes into it when they can see in this instance, yeah, it's 0.03 of winning percentage, but it really just is because they played an extra game and they lost it, right? Like is that different in the minds of the committee? I'm assuming they still see the record sitting there, because that's what's on the original ranking, right? Is the D3 record, and how much that plays in, because obviously one loss difference and the same number of wins looks a lot closer than maybe 0.03 of a winning percentage when it's sitting in a column.
I think one thing I've heard Luke be pretty clear on actually this year, both on Hoopsville and he's been on Bob's show, the QCast, is really sticking on what the criteria is. And on one of those, he mentioned it's winning percentage. It's not number of wins. It's not wins and losses. It's winning percentage. That's the criteria. And I think that's the same thing with the strength of schedule and non-conference strength of schedule. I don't think they really feel like they're charged with interpreting the strength of schedule. That's what the number is. So, they're comparing what the criteria literally are. They're not trying to say, well, they play in this conference and they have so many less opportunities. I think that's a different discussion, a discussion that they're happy to have, or the championships committee maybe could have on what the criteria is. But once the national committee is given the criteria, I think they feel like they need to interpret it more literally as what the manual says. And it's winning percentage. It's not number of wins and losses.
I just wonder if that record is also sitting there next to it. They discount that difference because they can see it interpreted by the record, right? Sure. I look at 0.03 and it looks pretty big in terms of winning percentage, but when you say that's one loss, it feels different. And I maybe would discount that a little more than I might if I just saw the decimals sitting there in a list.
To your point, Ryan, I agree. We hear the conversation about numbers of wins in those conversations far less. Matt, to your point, Luke has driven that home. And I think Sarah Quadracki last year and Luke this year have also driven home that they are trying to make this decision on primary criteria. And so non-conference SOS is not going to be in there to better understand the SOS. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way here. I just had always thought that the reason we threw Division III, put the non-conference SOS in there was to try and give these low SOS teams at least an opportunity to explain or better position themselves with a number that you can read and go, oh, okay, well, their non-conference is pretty good. You don't make it primary. You do make it secondary. But they're just not going to it as soon as I thought, or in a way that I thought they were. And that's good to know.
And I think that probably impacts more for Pool C selections, especially towards the end of that process, than it does at this point with the top 16, where the resumes are all so strong across the board, right? If you're getting into a situation where you've got like a 900 winning percentage and a 500 SOS versus the exact opposite, that might be one where you go and you take a look at something else. We just don't have those disparities at this point in the season because, the top 16 resumes are all really, really good.
Don't want to take too much of your night. I've got a lot to get to. Also myself, I got to be on a plane tomorrow. I know Riley maybe Riley and Scott Peterson will be joining us on the women's side, but I don't want to leave this if we haven't hit something that you guys felt was important. So I leave the floor open. Okay.
I mean, I think we'll see it play out a little bit more in the regional rankings next week, but it does seem like the last year or two, the committee has been more willing to just sort of admit that some regions are a lot weaker than others.
Yeah.
It really does feel like, region 2 is not getting a ton of respect from the way Tufts was treated. Obviously there's no 8 here at all. So
isn't Tufts in 1? Oh, you mean, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just because, region 8 doesn't have any teams represented. That's, we're going to have to see next Tuesday how that works. But it does seem like they're a little more willing to just say, hey, this region isn't very good. Beating a 1 here might be, equivalent to a 4 someplace else. And that hasn't really been the case in previous seasons.
Yeah, I even think in previous seasons, committee chairs have said that they do not consider that they consider a 1 across the board, and then a 2 or a 2. Or at least that's what we've heard them say. I don't know what the internal conversations are, but yeah, this year, I think we've specifically heard that they do try to dive in and figure out what the quality is. Obviously there's some regionality and a 1 is probably good, but is that a good or a kind of more of a middling win? I think they're really trying to figure that out this year. And I think that's overall good.
Well, is Guilford as a 3 in their region better than Platteville, who's a 1 in their region?
They just said yes. So I think maybe we'll see that going forward. Yeah.
And that's the other thing, is having this top 16. They've now got a published ranking of 16 teams, so you can definitively say that a win over Guilford is better than a win over Platteville because the committee has told us that. We haven't had that previously, so.
Yeah, and listen, this is the fun part. These committees evolve. They evolve because you get different people on them. They evolve because feedback from above and elsewhere. I have conversations with people saying, "Hey, listen, this was the tendency," and then some of these other conferences went, "Hey, stop. This isn't fair." And so you get a swing in the other direction. The championships committee gives them guidance in another way. This is why we have these conversations. It evolves in time. I also wonder, with the potential maybe of pairwise coming, if some of these committees are trying to either hone down how they're doing their criteria, or understand that if they want to make the right argument, whatever their argument is, they've got to adjust how they're doing it. I don't know. That's a tip of the iceberg type thing that could be dived into in the off season, since it's not coming for at least a little while longer. Gentlemen, appreciate the time. I know you're busy. I'm quickly looking. Yeah. You guys have been good. Great. Appreciate it. Give you guys any final words. Otherwise, we'll let you go and look forward to catching up with you next week, because I got some ideas I got to contact you about. But obviously a fun time of year, right, Matt?
Yeah. I just went over the calendar with my wife, all the Division III commitments I have for like the next 2 weeks. But that's what makes this time of year so fun, is that we have like these top 16 reveals. We have selections are just around the corner. Conference tournaments coming up. Conference champions regular season will be crowned this weekend. So that's why we love the conversation that we can have with you guys, with anyone else online about Division III basketball. Just a fun time of year to be participating in this.
Yeah, my wife hates my calendar right now. Ryan?
I mean, I guess it's the same, right? It's figuring out how to fit life into the midst of all these other things that are going on, and just looking forward to some good basketball, right? We've got tournaments coming up where we know what the wins are going to mean. That always feels a little bit better to me, that I know that's win and go on, as opposed to, what do I make of this win and how strong is that one? It's pretty clear when you get into tournament time, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, best time of the year. Even though I enjoy the entire year, this is definitely one of the more fun times. Guys, thanks so much for your time. We'll talk to you soon. Matt Snyder and Ryan Scott joining us on the Hoopsville hotline on this Hoopsville exclusive night. Top 16s revealed. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will dive into women's basketball. Scott Peterson will join us. Maybe somebody else. We'll see. We'll dive in quickly and get his take on what we heard from the women's side of things. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com and our friends at Sport Tours International. Quick shout out to Sport Tours. If you're looking to do maybe a foreign trip to Europe or somewhere else, or you're looking to challenge yourself in the holiday time at a really good basketball tournament, say the Daytona Beach Shootout, or more importantly, the D3Hoops.com Classic in Las Vegas, our friends at Sport Tours are the place you should go. Brett Seymour and his staff, along with others, will certainly help you craft the trip and or the tournament you're looking to challenge yourself with. Get our friends a call at Sport Tours International. You can contact us, myself, and I'll help you get in touch with them as well. Back with the women's panel next.
Coach of the Year, Administrator of the Year, All-America Team, Wade Trophy. The WBCA doesn't just honor coaches, but players, administrators, and much more. The WBCA strives to honor those who have contributed to the advancement of women's basketball. Celebrate the present, honor the past, look to the future.
It's on us to stop sexual assault.
In any way that we can.
To get a friend home safe.
To never blame the victim.
It's on us.
To stand up.
To make our community safe for all.
It's on us.
It's on us to look out for each other at parties.
It's on us.
To be more than just a bystander.
To step up and say something.
It's on us, all of us,
to stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
The National Association of Basketball Coaches is the nation's premier professional development and advocacy organization for basketball coaches at every level. The NABC strives to serve as the voice for coaches on national issues while advancing the core value of leadership, service, advocacy, education, and inclusion. To learn more about the NABC and to become a member, visit NABC.com and follow the NABC on social media at NABC 1927. That's NABC.com or NABC 1927 on social media.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's nearly 850 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over 2 decades. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're D3Hoops.com at www.D3Hoops.com.
Got to unmute the mic. Welcome back to Hoopsville, everybody. As we roll up, we're going to do our last segment here with the women's panel. At the end, we'll just do some quick work and then sign off. But again, great to have the top 16s revealed right here on Hoopsville for the second consecutive year on this exclusive show. Hope you learned something from it. Great to have the committee chairs on. Just talked men's with our men's panel. Let's talk women's with our women's panel. Ryan Scott doing double duty, filling in for Riley Zayas, who unfortunately couldn't make it at the last second, and Scott Peterson joining us as well as we dive in on the women's top 16s reveal and, of course, the Week 2 regional rankings as well. Scott, I'll start with you. Your overall reactions to what we learned tonight and learned this week.
My overall reaction from tonight is I think it was quite expected, which I think is a good thing. Overall, it was expected, and I see evidence of valuing very specific top game results quite a bit more than maybe in past years, which I think is awesome. I mean, if we're ranking our top 16 teams, picking our top 4 overall seeds, our opening weekend hosts, you want to know, can you beat top teams? Have you played them and have you beat them at the very top? And I like that part being valued.
Fair point. I'm actually going to show the top 16 for anybody who didn't spot it earlier during the show. It started with NYU, then Rhode Island College, Whitewater, Bowdoin, followed by Transylvania, Christopher Newport Catholic, Bates to round out the top 8, Oshkosh at 9, Smith, then Hope at 11, SUNY New Paltz, then Johns Hopkins, DeSales, Illinois Wesleyan, and Springfield rounded out the top 16. I know we're throwing Ryan Scott into the fire a little bit here with very little prep work, but he's a pro's pro. But Ryan, did you have any thoughts when you saw this women's top 16 or the rankings in general?
I mean, one, I do think the women's committee has done a great job over the last couple of years of sort of moving closer to what the mandate is, right? From the championships committee and kind of what how sort of religiously rigid the men's committee has been in recent years of following that criteria. The one thing I always note that's interesting, and this obviously comes down to, winning percentage and stuff. The resumes that stand out here are Transylvania and Hope, which have relatively low SOS, relatively low, regionally ranked wins, maybe a little higher than I might, or the men's committee might put those resumes. Not that they shouldn't belong here, but there is still a little bit of leaning on the winning percentage. And you sort of wonder, for these teams that everybody knows is good, is that somehow factoring in? Maybe I'm not saying intentionally that it's part of the discussion, but it's very hard in the back of your mind to say, yeah, but we know Transylvania and Hope are good, right? Like that just kind of, I wonder how much that still factors in.
Well, to be fair, women have always had a win-loss, or have used win-loss a little bit more than the men have. And I shouldn't say always, that's a horrible word, but at least in the last 15 years, almost to a fault. There are some times where they picked just based on the win-loss, and I think kind of passed over some of the other stuff. I think that's changed in the last couple of years, especially as they've worked together with the men's side on a number of things. So I'm okay with the win-loss still being a prevalent factor on the women's side in a lot of these cases.
And I just mean, maybe both of those teams might rightly be slotted 2 spots below where they are, right? Like that's quibbling at this point. But
Well,
it is
interestingly,
just
Hope
something
was
to note.
15 last year with a similar resume.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where I think they're valuing specific games. Hope beating Illinois Wesleyan Millikan. Only 10 teams in this top 16 have beat another one of the top 16, and Hope's one of them. And I think both of those wins really stand out and can make up for the fact that they don't have the same counting numbers as everybody else. But as I've looked at the week 2 regional rankings and then this top 16, I feel like either pure counts of wins VRRO or even your winning percentage VRRO matter relatively less than they did last year. They're looking for the composition of those. And I think where Hope was and where DeSales was are the biggest indicators of that for me.
And even something like, New Paltz and Hopkins, very close resumes, but New Paltz has the better signature win out of that duo, right? So
correct.
Well,
yeah,
and
something like
and
that.
by the way, we talked about on the men's side, and we brought it up with the committee chairs, how your resume changes. Let's bring up Johns Hopkins as an example. They've got a win and a loss to Gettysburg. Gettysburg had a pretty good resume, but they just lost Dickinson. So Dickinson's coming off the regional ranks. That's going to hurt Gettysburg's resume per se, which in turn will slightly hurt Johns Hopkins' resume per se. Now, Gettysburg goes and wins out, or at least Hopkins and Gettysburg face in the conference championship game, then this is, they kind of help each other, as it were, in that case. But there's an example, again, where, Hopkins, if Gettysburg wins out, maybe that win over Gettysburg looks better. But Gettysburg's struggling because they're going to lose the games on their resume to Dickinson. Where do they make that up? Well, it's going to have to be Hopkins. Like, this is where this gets really interesting and complicated.
And that's where I think it's really interesting that we know they're using week 1's regional rankings as the basis for week 2's VRO, because I don't think Gettysburg is ahead of Scranton once they lose those 2 wins.
No, and I don't think anybody at Gettysburg thinks they're ahead of Scranton once they lose those 2 either. I think that's a well-known thought.
And I think Scranton is going to be moving up quickly. They have beaten DeSales and Catholic, which are going to look great. And I think they might have 3 ranked win opportunities left. And I think Scranton is by far the team that could very easily find themselves hosting opening weekend that was not in the top 16.
Great point. Because I think Gettysburg only hosts if, let's say, and I'm jumping on a limb here, Catholic needs a host. And I don't even think that's fair. I don't even think that's the right place to put it. No, I agree. I think, and then Scranton's also in a prime position because NYU's up there, and NYU women technically won't be able to host the opening weekend. You're going to have to move things around. Not that they move it to Scranton. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying you're going to need hosts up in that region.
Yep.
I meant to look at last year's top 16 just to look at anybody. Now, that women had priority that weekend. If this top 16 changed in terms of who hosted, and I don't see anybody jumping out at me that didn't host. You guys might remember better. Smith, Scranton, Christopher Newport, NYU. NYU didn't host, but they didn't put in to host. Transylvania, Whitewater.
Gym?
Yeah. Well, yeah, they were having trouble securing the gym. Whitewater, Babson, Trinity with Texas was 8. Ohio Northern, Tufts, WashU, Trinity, Connecticut, Baldwin Wallace, Ithaca, Hope, Chicago. So NYU
I don't remember
didn't
specifically, but I think most of them hosted.
Yeah, I think
pretty close.
Yeah, except for NYU, obviously, who for other reasons. And then the men get priority this year, and NYU's women will have to be somewhere else. Ryan, to your tweet, per my question.
Oh, I forgot that I'm on here now. I can bring this up.
You are, sir. You ought to make this one. This one, you took my question a whole nother place.
So normally, if the women don't have priority in the first weekend, a lot more teams are going to put in to bid because you never know where they're going to send those pods that might otherwise be, assigned to those top seeds. And so, if you're in the greater New York area, then you might not have otherwise put into host, knowing that the NYU women, may very well not host, are you putting it in? But then I thought, if I don't put into host, are my odds of avoiding NYU the first weekend higher? And that's a consideration that these teams are going to have to think about, knowing that NYU is likely going to have to go somewhere else. If I put into host, am I going to end up being the second best team in a pod that is going to be very hard to win?
I mean,
right. I mean,
it's a valid point. It's not where I was taking that.
Traveling to John Jay or SUNY Canton, you know?
Well, I mean, listen, there's some.
I was in New York last weekend, and I had a number of parents asking me what was going to happen with this. And, you know, I mentioned just like New Paltz being a place that's not super far away with a team that, you know, they're in the top 16. I wasn't sure that their resume would be that high. Maybe that's not a good example, but, you know, someone that might be is in 17 through 25, you know, that's within 100 miles of New York is maybe one of those places they might send somebody.
Vassar, Skidmore, Ithaca.
Right. Or, you know, like Trinity, Connecticut or someplace like that, you know, that is a good team, but their resume is not all the way up there. But we just don't know. Although the committee does generally try to keep it pretty close as much as they can. I was surprised that she brought up maybe giving it to the third seed in a pod, which they haven't done in a long time. They used to do that. I mean, way back when, 15 years ago, they would try to put it at the third seed in the pod if they could. They haven't been doing that the last 5 or 6 years. I know we went back and checked last year, and it's been like since 2008 since they did that. But she mentioned that as a possibility. So maybe we'll see it.
Got an email that precipitated that question to them about where they would do with a host. The emailer basically saying they shouldn't be penalized by being sent to the number 2 seed and playing on their home court in the round of 32. I don't necessarily agree with that. The 2 seeds on the opposite side of that pod anyway. No matter where you're playing, it's the home court of somebody, right? It's the 2, the 3, or the 4 in that quad. You're not playing at home. I don't think playing it at the 2 is the end of the world.
And frankly, at the level where every NYU parent who asked me was much more concerned about being home the second weekend than they were being home the first weekend.
Which I alluded to as well on that one. NYU's better positioned to pull that off. Well, we have a question from Kaylee. He says, best time of the year hopping in late. Do you think NYU is going to host? Would love to catch games at New York City. Well, I don't know which NYU they're referring to, men or women. I think the men are in pretty good shape to host on the men's side. This is all under the understanding that A, NYU puts in to host, and B,
that is happening.
I'm just saying. No, I know. I'm covering my bases, sir. This is for everybody. You got to put in to host, and the B option that they're selected to host if there isn't some problems. Now, Bethany Danley has brought it up on several occasions, and I think she's got a valid point here. In Division I, and I think Division II, they have a per diem that is compensated for when you get into larger markets like Chicago, New York, LA, Atlanta, whatever, because the per diem barely covers meals in New York City. That's not NYU's problem. That's not their fault, but it's been an issue in terms of trying to find the right host. So anyway, my point is, conceivably, men should host opening weekend. I can imagine the Paulson Center will get the men unless they just tailspin in the last 3 games here. And then women would conceivably host the second weekend if they're still in the tournament at that point and everything is kosher.
We should mention that the NYU volleyball team this fall did not get to host, and they were told that not entirely, but largely financial. It costs a lot to send teams to New York, and it costs a lot for fans to go, right? Because you're paying $50 to park if you're lucky, some of those things are factored in to these considerations. And I know,
and that's been a problem in a couple of sports.
Stated that they're going to do as much as they possibly can to make that happen, but
and that's where I feel bad for NYU. It's not their fault. Now, I've also been told in a non-specific sport, because there are multiple sports at play, that, and this has been true in a lot of schools, this is not just an NYU issue, they aren't able to secure the hotel contracts. Now, I think that has been solved maybe in NYU's case. I don't know about elsewhere. That's not an NYU isolated incident. This has happened at a number of institutions in a number of sports where they don't secure the bid the hotel bids, and Bethany talked about that on a previous conversation, and she said that is now a major requirement in all sports. So, by the way, soccer for NYU was played in New Jersey. Granted, that's where they play it, but my point is they found a way to get it out of maybe the higher costs of it. But conceivably, yes, women will be the second weekend, men the first weekend if everything holds out as we see it now. Any other surprises, Scott?
To me, one of the biggest surprises was DeSales, where they were. I think if you're just looking at the winning percentage, strength of schedule, count of wins versus region-ranked opponents, that they should be a lot higher. And to me, the only way to get them lower is you dig into the wins. They have 2 over Arcadia, who is a region 3. So you're like, hey, that feels great, right? They're 3rd in their region. But I think if you keep digging further, a lot of those, I think is that region 4. A lot of those teams that are ranked are very weak. A lot of their SOSs are weak. And I think you can make the case for some resumes being a lot stronger than DeSales that ended up ranked ahead of them. But I think you only get there when you're drilling down to that level. And I, which is a level deeper than the number rank in a region, which is to say, hey, we know that a 3 in one region is not the same as a 3 in another region. And we're going to that level.
It's interesting because I wasn't all that surprised where DeSales was. Maybe I just had a different read on it. I didn't have the same read you all had. I didn't have time to dive into it either.
They had the same SOS as Paltz, 43 points of winning percentage, and they were 3 and 1 versus 4 and 3, and they're 2 spots lower.
Well,
and they're same winning percentage as Hopkins with a better SOS and a better win-loss VRO, and they're 1 spot lower.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. No.
Going back to last
some of those
year,
they were breaking into the non-conference SOS for some of that because she did mention they were doing that towards the end. So
yeah, she said that they did have to go there at the end. You're right.
DeSales is weird because the entire MAC Freedom played a tremendously terrible non-conference slate and won like all the games, and so I think that caused their SOS to be quite high because OWP counts for more than OOWP.
True.
So I wouldn't be surprised if their non-conference SOS looks pretty good. I don't have that number in front of me, and they still were lower than I expected. So my guess was 9th. They ended up 14th, which is kind of a big change.
No, you're right. But they're in a perfect spot for a host too.
They're a perfect spot. They should host.
One of the questions, not to switch gears too much, Dave, that I'm curious to get Scott's take on. Yeah. So we had a couple of teams from good conferences. I'm thinking of Emory, Chicago, and Stout specifically that played really strong non-conference schedules this year and then got into conference. And it feels like based on what we've seen in this top 16, they've got too many losses, right? Like obviously you have to win games to get onto this list. But I'm wondering if some of these teams that are in good conferences are rethinking some of those non-conference schedules at this point, right? Like you're going to get plenty of numbers out of your conference.
We've had some men's coaches make that argument to us.
Non-conference load to make your resume look a little bit better.
All right.
Yeah.
We've had men's coaches make that argument to us, right?
Well, it's kind of moved in the opposite direction for the men, right? They've
Ironically,
been trying to recognize those teams that are scheduling non-conference, and it feels like the women are not rewarding that this year.
Maybe.
Partially. By the way, Stout actually ended up playing a pretty weak non-conference schedule, at least judged by non-conference.
It just looked
SOS.
good at the beginning.
They played a couple strong teams, then played just about the entire UMAC, which really dragged it down. But you're totally right that if you know, like I'm in the NESCAC, the UAA, the WAC, and maybe even the CCIW now, I'm going to get so much SOS and ranked opportunities for my conference. I don't want to overly burden myself with losses in non-conference. And I kind of think the model that Hamilton is using by playing almost nobody in non-conference could actually be optimal for creating a really good resume if you're, say, a Bowdoin or a Bates, who still created a great resume, even playing a really solid non-conference schedule. But it might be a more optimal way to go about it. And then on the flip side, if you're in a conference with a really weak bottom, I know the MIAA well, and that's one of them. I think you got to play as many hard teams as you can non-conference. because you're not going to have the opportunities within your own conference.
The real
and
catch.
Hope went out
Go
to
ahead.
do that. That's something we've criticized him about, and they still didn't get their SOS very high, right? So,
Yeah,
Right.
someday I'm going to have a more heart-to-heart conversation with Brian. I'm sure he's listening now about that, because I'm still a little bit befuddled about it. But Scott, yes, to your point, I think there's more of a median in the middle somewhere. I don't think you. First off, if you need those tough teams to play you, and those tough teams are going to stop playing you, then we've hit an impasse somewhere that got to break through. Second, I don't know if everybody in the conference decided that they don't need to worry about their non-conference schedule as much, then I think the SOS starts getting pulled down anyway. Like there's got to be some. I get your point. I absolutely do. But maybe if you got 7 out of conference games, you don't need to go kill yourself in all 7. Maybe you can go and challenge yourself in 4 of those, and you'll be okay.
Yeah, and it does start to change if every single NESCAC does the same thing.
Right.
Right. It absolutely starts to change. But at this point, the NESCACs, the UAAs, they generally schedule pretty hard non-conference. And if you just decide, I'm going to schedule 2 games easier next year, that could be a really smart move. And I think there's lots of things you can do with your schedule. It obviously takes 2 to tango, but things like we're seeing on the men's side, like the Great Lakes Invitational, I think is almost a win-win for all parties involved. Especially as we see top wins and SOS be valued more and more on the men's side.
Stop trying to make me bring the Hoopsville Classic back, sir. Stop. No, I'm serious. We have talked about it. One thing I think that's going to be interesting next year, we have 2 conferences making significant schedule changes. You've got the MIAC, who's going to go to the ODAC model, though they're more 3/4, 1/4. I really wish they went 2/3, 1/3, but they're going 3/4, 1/4. So they'll free up some more games. Centennial is going in that direction too, in both men and women. That's going to free up a ton of games in that region. I think this is a little bit of a pattern that's coming. You're going to have a really big Empire 8. You're going to have some other conference. Well, geez, the UEC has to figure out whatever the frick it's doing with its scheduling. So, to your point, there's going to be more non-conference games. You can't kill yourself in all of them. Maybe there's a little bit for everybody to go around.
Yeah, and I tweeted about this, I think, just today, that I don't want to punish or talk badly about the NESCAC for the single round robin or the UAA for existing in multiple regions. I have no idea what goes on behind closed doors. But the reality is those are massive benefits. And conferences reducing the number of conference games that they are forcing their teams to play comes with large potential gains in how they can improve their resume on a national level. If that matters to the conference, right? I know that not every conference has that as their top line goal, but if that is your goal, there is so much that so many conferences can do to play fewer than 20 or 18 or even 16 conference games.
I agree. I
think we forget it's not, it sounds bad saying it, but especially for a league like the Centennial and the MIAC that have so many teams in them, moving to fewer conference games also means you're playing fewer games against the bottom of your conference.
Bingo.
Which is also messing up your resume, right? It's not just that your conference games bring you closer to 500. If you've got a bunch of teams that are dragging you down at the bottom and you only have to play half as many games against them, like that, not just who you can schedule, but just not playing those games is going to help you.
You're only playing Bryn Mawr once instead of twice every 2 years, twice on a 2-year cycle out of 3. That's not a bad deal.
If you look at the effect of the 2 games against the bottom of your league in the SCAC, the Landmark, the HCAC, the MIAA, it crushes the SOS of the top teams in the conference. And those are games that every team in the top 50 would go 2-0 on, 4-0, 6-0. And it's hard to, come up with a system to not penalize teams such for those games. But can we get back to a couple things in the top 16?
Go for it.
Go for it.
You touched on those teams with really strong SOS that maybe have too many losses. I think Emory and Trinity of Connecticut is another one that pops up for me. They won 75% of their games so far. 6 625 SOS, and they have 5 ranked wins, and some of them are good. And among their 5 ranked losses, which admittedly is a lot, they lost to Rhode Island College, Bowdoin, and Smith among them. And so I think you could absolutely make a case for they've played a very hard schedule. They've won a ton of those games. They've beat a lot of top teams, and a lot of their losses are to teams that are going to be in the top 8. And I think by seeing Emory and Trinity, Connecticut not in our top 16, it might mean bad things for WashU, Chicago, Middlebury, and Mary Washington come Selection Sunday, who have significantly lower winning percentage than almost anyone that they're going to be going up against, but might have the SOS and the wins VRO that Emory and Trinity do have right now. And was not enough to get either of those into the top 16. Now, maybe they're 17th and 18th or something really close. But I think that type of resume might have a tougher go of it this year than last year.
So that brings me to another one I'm just curious about, that I've kind of been noticing a little anecdotally, a little more on the men's side perhaps than the women, but it feels like, you got your data numbers guys. And so like when you see an SOS and say it's 500 versus 530, right? It seems like the committees are seeing that gap as much more significant than, say, the difference between 550 and 580, right? Like the number is actually the same, but once both numbers are high, they're sort of not valuing the gap in the same way. I don't know how that works out mathematically.
Maybe
I don't
bell
know
curving
if you're
it.
seeing some of the same things.
I mean, mathematically, it's backwards.
Right.
Right? Because a 625 to a 605 SOS, that's a 20-point gap. That could be the same as a 520 to a 410. Like in the quality of team that you are facing to construct that, because as teams get closer and closer to undefeated, it's harder and harder to get closer and closer. And so the quality of team is greater and greater to create any sort of SOS over 600. I think Oshkosh was rewarded. So I think if yours is really good, like Oshkosh's is really good, Illinois Wesleyan's is really good, and they kind of popped up. Actually, I thought they were going to be 15th and they're 15th. And so I think that's a really interesting thought that Luke said directly on the QCast, that they know that the same SOS gap is not the same at different spots in the SOS. I don't know if the women are talking about it like that. And I don't know where all the specific inflection points really are. We like to use 500 because it's a clean round number. I don't know if that's a true inflection spot or if it's at 490 or if it's at 515, but it's somewhere between 485 and 520. The quality of opponent almost drops off a cliff. And I think the committee acknowledged that by not ranking Webster at all in Region 8 with a 471 SOS.
Well, and that's what I was just trying to figure out, is because it is true that those points actually mean more the farther you get away from the middle, right? And not that 500 is an inflection point, but it is the middle of the scale. And the farther you get away from that on either side, each point actually
means a lot more. Yeah. In an increasing sense.
I think the more interesting thing to me for the Webster example was, I think their SOS is so below the mean, or whatever you want to call it, that they couldn't overlook it. I've always made the argument that I think when you get to the extremes of the SOS numbers, I think it's harder and harder to put more weight on it, because at some point it's outside the realm of measurable and understandable, if that makes any sense. Like if you're in the middle, I get the hemming and the hawing. At the end, at some point, even with win-loss percentages, I think you could make that argument maybe a little bit. But my point being is, sometimes I think that a really strong SOS gets misconstrued as somehow a really strong team, and I worry about that. And I think maybe the committee is here saying a couple of things. One, Webster, great, but you've played no one, and we know that they've played no one. Even their non-conference schedule is no one. They did not go out and really challenge themselves. Even WashU's nearby. And granted, Opponent
why I
has to
think you
play
gotta
them
take both
too.
of them. Right. And they might not be interested in maximizing their SOS to any degree.
And
But
it's very
that's why
possible.
I think you have to take the two of them together, right? Because having a great SOS doesn't mean that you're a quality team. But I think, for example, Stevens, again, going back to the Mac Freedom, I have 540 winning percentage against a 586 SOS. I mean, they could be better than, New Jersey City at a 696 winning percentage and a 507 SOS. And so it's not saying that just because you have the 80 points of SOS on them, you're better, but it's, recognizing what does that 80 point gap and at that point on the SOS distribution actually mean for a difference in winning percentage. And I think in a lot of spots, it might be more than people think, because just playing, say, a 450 SOS, we say, oh, that team won 45% of their games. Well, it doesn't mean that you have a 55% chance of beating them. You can't just, you might have a 95% chance of beating a 450 SOS team, but only a 70% chance of beating a 510 SOS team. And I don't know where all those numbers fall, but ultimately that we're trying to figure out, like, is it actually more impressive what you've done? And that's what the men had to do with Rochester last year and make a call. Do we think it's more impressive or not? And not just award it to a number that's way bigger without trying to really figure out what does the bigger number mean?
Right. Yeah.
And that's where we're running into these issues with trying to come up. We call it pairwise, but I think we've realized that's a brand name at this point more than it is a mathematical equation. But figuring out what that formula actually is that's fair is really difficult. And I'm not a big math guy, but I still feel like that is the value of having a committee, right? Is that you have human beings who are evaluating something that we can't necessarily put a finger on. And yeah, they make mistakes, but a formula is going to make mistakes too, right? Like it's going to produce the result you want it to, but that doesn't mean that it's ranking the teams correctly,
I think the one thing that can be nice about a formula is it codifies what might be, kind of just what's done, even if what's done is consistent. Because I think, because people talk about, one reason we want pairwise is for consistency. I think the men's and women's committees have been pretty darn consistent over these past 3 years. A lot of it has been exactly what I'm going to expect. But
it's about committees who aren't consistent.
Sure. And
it's the I've heard that about other driving the problem. Yeah.
But I can totally understand if I'm a coach, I want someplace to tell me as of today exactly where I stand. And having a formula will give you that. And if the formula spits out teams in an order that look wacky, you can tinker with the formula, and I don't know the governance over when you do that and how often, but I think that can be a gain where everyone knows this is the formula, this is where we stand today, and do we want to do things to change it? Whereas now, who knows, maybe a team at the end of the Pool C table feels like it's a black box decision why they got left out and someone else got in, even though for the last team or two, the resumes are so close anyway, that it's, I don't know that a formula would create happier people.
And it would give us the kind of information we have tonight every day, right? You would know what the top 16 resumes are every
I don't want to lose my exclusivity, okay?
Well, and also, like, I would have about 80% less to do if that was
It's true. So. It's true. Anything else jump out of you, Scott, before we let you go?
The last thing was you want to have, at least a couple wins versus regional ranked opponents, especially for those last few spots. And so I came up with a list of teams that I think might struggle unless they pull an upset in their conference tournament to get to 2 wins that I think if they do not get a Pool A might have a real tough time at the table if they get there.
Ooh, you're previewing what I want to do Tuesday. I love it.
We got Concordia Moorhead, Loras, Wisconsin Lutheran, Washington and Jefferson, Marymount, Albertus Magnus, Webster, Nazareth, Framingham, Coe, Portland, Trine, Roger Williams, and Widener.
Wow.
Are kind of a batch that I think would struggle because most of them, if they're going to get another ranked win opportunity, it's going to be in the conference title game. So we know if they win it, if they get that ranked win, they're in anyway. So if they need a Pool C, it's that they likely didn't get that ranked win. And I think that kind of batch would struggle. In addition to that WashU, Chicago, Middlebury, Mary Washington, really low winning percentage comparatively batch, I think are some indications.
Good stuff. Ryan, any thoughts?
I was just really impressed with how strong the women's resumes are overall, especially compared to the men. Like those SOS
Agreed.
winning percentage numbers at the bottom of that list are just phenomenal, right? Like, and I think that it's going to be a real challenge for that women's committee. You know, for the men, sometimes you have some wild variances that you're considering at the end, right? Like a really high in one or the other, but you're getting really good numbers across the board, much farther down the list for these women's teams than you are for the men, and that just makes it so much harder to parse the difference between them. And you know, it's I don't know who's on your committee for choosing your mock women's ranking. You might want to box out an extra hour for that discussion this year.
I'm already
that's
starting
gonna
to
be
think
really
about
difficult.
it. Yeah,
Well, and
I got to piece that together. I'm thank you for volunteering.
with the way that I think I'm seeing the women's committee really dig into specific top wins, it makes it way harder on me to create any sort of overarching formula to try to rank them, because there's win percentage in SOS kind of pairs that are all out of whack in this top 16 and not in a bad way. And so I think it could make it really difficult to dig into everything, because I'm just one person and there's, 65, 75 between the racks and the national committee digging into stuff. And if they are looking at head-to-heads, specific wins versus region ranked opponents, and not just were they highly ranked in the region, that's a lot of stuff that I could very easily just never look at.
We got a comment on the YouTube simulcast wondering if Scott's new job requires him to wear Ping branded apparel.
No, I do work for a golf company, but there's no requirements on the brand that I wear.
I was going to say, send me a check. Giving Ping quite a bit of love. No, I kid. Hey, guys, really appreciate it. I don't know if there's any more to dive into. We've already talked longer than I thought we would, but it's good stuff. It's great information and I think the women's side has become so much more fascinating over the years as coaches have gone out there and really challenged themselves and kind of changed how they do their non-conference scheduling. And we're getting to see that play out here, and it's a lot of fun. But thanks as always. We always give the final word. Ryan, I'll start with you. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, just looking forward to, as I said for the last panel, all these tournament games coming up. And I think especially for the women, it used to be that you could pretty much pencil in your, 14 of your second weekend teams before the tournament starts. And that's just not going to be the case anymore. There's only maybe 5 or 6 teams that I would be surprised if they didn't make the second weekend. And that's just
depending on matchups,
so much more interesting. Right.
Scott,
I mean, we just signed why you get pushed by Case Western. So even that 5 or 6 are probably less given than we might think.
That's a good point.
I wonder how popular that video of that game is on the scouting sites.
Oh, good point.
Right
Yeah, good point.
That was one heck of a game plan that they were able to put together there. So,
yeah, it's funny. Actually, quick side note: there was a team in the Centennial Conference that took on Hopkins and went all zone the whole game, and it was a really low-scoring affair. So I walked up to a coach at another game who was taking on Hopkins, and I said, "We're going to see zone?" He goes, "No, nope, not going to go away from what I did." I said, "But it seemed to work well." He goes, I know. It's interesting when teams start to look into those kind of things. I find it fascinating. Scott, any final thoughts?
I'm just so excited for conference tournaments. I think it's going to be a little bit of a change of pace for me, where I've been really focused on your overall NCAA resume, when I'm probably going to be digging into more of the conference tournaments that are going to be single bid. But I see lots of opportunity for the non-favorite to come through. And that's fun, like it hasn't been terribly exciting to tune into the ARC tournament until the championship game. And I think that's quite a bit different this year on the women's side. And that's fun. And I'm also interested in looking at the tournaments that have 3 strong ranked teams, where whoever's in the semis might have a better chance to construct a hosting level resume than whoever the 1 seed is, who doesn't get to play a ranked team in the semis.
Good point. No, that's a very good point. Yep. Because the one seed kind of gets hurt by the whole tournament.
Could be, yeah. Well, maybe not hurt, because usually the 4 seed is not a really bad.
Yeah, I just mean that they're the ones who aren't getting the benefits that the lower seeds end up getting from the tournament.
Well, and the number of conferences that are putting buys into their conference tournaments, which just means every game is more competitive than they would have been otherwise too. So,
but it's not far-fetched to see Carroll go 2-0 and be the CCIW team hosting opening weekend. And that's probably, usually you have a pretty good handle on it's going to be team A or team B that's going to come through this conference tournament, and it is not the case, and makes it quite fun.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Gents, I'll let you go. Thanks so much. Great work, and we'll talk to you soon. Ryan Scott Peterson joining us here on the Hoopsville Hotline. That's going to wrap it up for us. Quick reminder of the rankings as we had them tonight. There you are on the men's side: Hampden-Sydney, Randolph-Macon, Widener, John Carroll, Case Western Reserve, NYU, Oswego State, Trinity, Texas, followed by Trine, Trinity, Connecticut, Guilford, Cal Lutheran, Keene State, Rowan, Platteville, and Catholic. And on the women's side, it ended up being New York University #1, Rhode Island College 2, Whitewater 3, Bowdoin, Transylvania, Christopher Newport, Catholic, Bates rounding out the 8, Oshkosh at 9, Smith, Hope, SUNY New Paltz, Johns Hopkins, DeSales, Illinois Wesleyan, Springfield. Quick reminder on the men's side of things that the bracket will be revealed on the 26th. We'll have our selection show on the 25th. And, of course, championship weekend is the 14th and 16th in Fort Wayne, Indiana. On the women's side, brackets will be announced at 2:30 on the 26th. And the championship weekend is at Columbus, Ohio on the 14th and 16th as well. That's going to do it for us. Appreciate everybody tuning in. I want to thank every single sports information director and athletics communications office out there and their staffs who helped put this show together. We reached out to, I want to say, 21 men's teams and 23 women's teams to put this together because, again, we don't know who they are, and we need to get work done before we get the top 16s. And even then, I was writing scripts until about 30 minutes before the show. But everybody who was able to contribute video and get us some notes about their organization, their team, their program, etc., most appreciative of them. Some of them having to fight through some technical difficulties or my mind just being dumb. So I appreciate every single sports information department out there. Again, 21 on the men's side, we reached out to 23 on the women's. And I want to thank Scott and Matt and Ryan and Pat and Gordon and everybody there for contributing their help behind the scenes, which included giving me a sense of who I needed to reach out to for those emails, up to coming on the show tonight and talking about things, Pat Coleman running things behind the scenes as we announced the top 16. Really appreciate all of their support. And I got to thank the support of my family, who knew I was stressed all week and gave me some distance, allowed me to not get some sleep because I had to work, but also work through some things. So it was great for them. Appreciate them. The sign back there put together by my son. I cannot point today. That one. He put that sign together. And other things that go on here. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else, but I think that's it. Also, thanks most importantly to the national committees for once again entrusting us with the work. I want to thank the liaisons for their help as well. Nice to get an email from them saying, hey, how can we help you? In the future, I might take you up on that. We're going to have to outsource some of the stuff that I do to make my life a little bit less stressful. You never know. Watch out, liaisons. I might be coming for you to help put some stuff together. I kid because I know you got enough on your plate. But I really appreciate their support as well. That's going to do it for us. Quick scheduling reminder of what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. We will not have a show on Monday. It will be Tuesday afternoon. The reason it'll be Tuesday afternoon when the rankings are coming up, interesting enough, is A, I'm out of town this weekend. I'm literally getting on a plane tomorrow that I have not packed for. I will be back on Monday, but too late to put a show on the air. So we'll be doing it on Tuesday afternoon because there's a chance I might have to be somewhere Tuesday night. But also, I don't want to do a show Tuesday night when we're going to have another show Thursday afternoon. So we'll do a show on Thursday afternoon because I do have to be somewhere on Thursday evening. I am playing on when I'm going to do this, but I might get Scott and Ryan and some other guys and Mike, Matt on the show to kind of prognosticate who needs to get some stuff done. I'm thinking about doing it Tuesday, but we'll see. It might be Thursday. So that is coming up. So Tuesday's show is going to be like a noon or 1 o'clock show, depending on who we get. We'll determine that. Thursday, same thing, about a noon, 1 o'clock show. Then Sunday, I cannot believe we are 10 days out. Sunday show, I'm aiming for a 5 p.m. start. We might go a little bit later than that, but that'll be our selection show. Might do it men, then women, to be decided. We'll see. We'll get our mock selection committees put together for that. We'll also hear from some special guests along the way. At some point, probably on Sunday, we'll record it. We'll hear from the committee chairs one last time. Then Monday, confirmed today, I'll be on the selection shows once again. Will Haskett will be the men's selection host. That is on Monday at 1 o'clock, 2:30. It was Jeremiah Johnson. Is that who I said it was the co-host for that? We'll be doing that. And then we'll do a bracket breakdown show that night. And we'll hear from the committee chairs again that night, I hope, to talk about the decisions that they were made on the brackets and selections and all that. Did you follow? Hope you did. I didn't, because I needed you to take notes. So there you go, folks. We're going to sign off. Thank you very much for tuning in to this Hoopsville exclusive reveal of the top 16s in Division III, if the tournaments were starting this week. Again, thank you, everybody, for coming not only on the show, but tuning in. Great numbers. I was checking those out throughout. Quite a few of you tuned in for much of this show, and I really appreciate that. Big shout out to Sport Tours International for their support. I know we did not have a tote poured on here, but for those of you who donated, we're going to update that. Next week's going to be a big push. We are way below our goal, but that's partially because we need to push it a little bit harder. But I thank everybody for making the effort, to say the least. Yeah, interesting. Sorry, getting a little note on the side. I'm going to get back to that one. Appreciate you all. Thank you. Take care. We will see you on Tuesday. I'll try and stay in touch on social media during the week. You've been watching Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com and Sport Tours International from the NABC studios. Can't thank the National Association of Basketball Coaches enough for their support of our work. We're taking a break until Tuesday. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in. It's a fun show once we get it done and dusted. We'll talk to you soon, everybody.